Okay, we are now live on YouTube. Is Mayor O'Brien on? Not yet. I don't see her listed as an attendee.
I just texted her the link and emailed her my link, so maybe she'll pop on in a second.
Okay, all right, we'll just give it another minute or two and
She says to go ahead and have Ricardo start the meeting, and she'll be there as soon as she can.
okay.
All right, good morning and welcome everybody. We are just waiting for our mayor to show up, so we will get the meeting started. Do we do a roll call introductions? What do we do? I'm sorry.
Yes, so first is call to order, so thank you. Next is roll call, and I believe Planning Manager Hurin is prepared to do the roll call for both the City Council and the Planning Commission.
Very good, let's go ahead with that then.
All right, Councilmember Beach.
Present.
Councilmember Coulson. Councilmember Coulson. Okay. Councilmember Brownrigg.
Here.
Vice Mayor Ortiz.
Here.
Commissioner Camarado.
Here.
Commissioner Gall.
Here.
Commissioner Loftus.
Here.
Commissioner Schmid.
Here.
Vice Chair Terrace.
Here.
Chair Say.
Here.
So we have Commissioner Sargent absent, and Mayor O'Brien will be joining us shortly.
Very good, and then with that, I have a meeting overview, and I think it's Mr. Gardner is going to take us through that.
Thank you, yes. Welcome City Council members, Planning Commissioners, and members of the public. We're really excited to have this joint City Council Planning Commission meeting today, and particularly the topics that we have. We have three interesting topics. The first is the town square, which a year ago we started looking at that project, and now we're ready to look at designs. Next up is a discussion of life sciences and biotech and the Bayfront. There's kind of a number of different issues that go with that item. And then the third item is discussing a perennial topic that we have here with the design review changes to projects during construction and maybe some procedures that staff or the Planning Commission could consider in the future. There is a public comment period for public comments non-agenda right after this, but first, before we go there, Planning Manager Hurin has some information just regarding how to make public comments, both in that item as well as during the items themselves.
Great. So for all in attendance today, please note that this meeting is being held using the Zoom webinar format. So you will see that council members, planning commissioners, and staff are panelists. Please note that there are several ways to submit comments during this meeting. First, you may raise your hand in Zoom by clicking on the raise hand button located at the bottom of your screen. The public who are participating in the Zoom webinar by phone can dial *9 to raise a hand. Second, you may also submit your comment using chat in Zoom by clicking on the chat button located at the bottom of your screen. Staff will then read the comment at the appropriate time. Please be aware that chats will be seen by all of the panelists, which include council members, planning commissioners, and staff. Chats are not anonymous. And lastly, you may send your comments by email to publiccomment@burlingame.org. Staff will be monitoring emails submitted during the meeting, which will be read at the appropriate time. The length of the email comments should be commensurate with the 3 minutes customarily allowed for verbal comments. Thank you.
Thank you. And just in terms of how each item will work, we do follow a format similar to the regular City Council Planning Commission meetings, where there's a presentation, then questions, then public comment. So there will be a public comment period for each item, and then discussion with the City Council and the Planning Commission. Given this is a retreat kind of meeting, there may be some desire to change the order of some of the public comment versus questions and comments. So we can work with that on each particular item, but there will be an opportunity for the public to provide input on each item.
Madam Mayor, I hand you the gavel.
Sorry about that. I'm having a lot of technical difficulties this morning and had to reboot my computer and still was having problems. So sorry about that. All right.
So we are now going to public comment. So we're opening it up for public comment.
Okay, excellent. So members of the public may speak about any item not on the agenda. Members of the public wishing to suggest an item for a future City Council agenda may do so during the public comment period. The Ralph M. Brown Act prohibits the Ralph M. Brown Act prohibits the City Council and Planning Commission from acting on any matter that is not on the agenda. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes, and why don't we open that up now? Okay.
Madam Mayor, I'm not seeing
any hands raised. And have we gotten any emails?
no emails for this meeting yet. The email address is publiccomment@burlingame.org, but at the moment we don't have any.
Okay, so then on that note, I will close the public comment, and then we'll go into our discussion topics. And today we have 3 topics. Each will be about an hour. I do want to keep to our time limits today so people can get going on the rest of their Saturday. So we will start with topic number 1, and that is the town square. And we're going to be reviewing 2 alternatives this morning. So Kevin, are you going to start out with the staff report, and then we'll go into the representatives from Urban Field?
Yes.
Very good.
So thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council, members of the Planning Commission. We're really excited to have this opportunity to come full circle a year later from where we started looking at the town square. Now we've got a couple of design alternatives. And in between then and now, we had a lot of public input, different than what we would have expected. It was all done virtually, but it's been interesting and perhaps an opportunity we hadn't anticipated. We had some virtual community meetings in November and December. We've had a community engagement site through a platform called Social Pinpoint. We've had surveys. So it's really been a very robust public input in a way that we've all been kind of learning as we go along. This is the first time we've shown the 2 alternatives. So we wanted to be able to give the design team an opportunity to walk you through both the alternatives and the thought process. So this is the first time we're seeing them today. So without further ado, I would like to hand over the presentation to our team from Urban Field Studio, and they will introduce themselves and start showing us things.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm Frank Fuller, a partner with Urban Field, and it is a pleasure to be with you here this morning. And almost a year later from the time we started the public process and the design process at a joint meeting of the council and the commission a year ago. So with me today are Heidi Sokolovsky, also a partner with Urban Field, and Marco Esposito, a principal with SWA Landscape Architecture, and they will be presenting as well as myself in a brief presentation. So what we have done and what we're going to show you briefly is an overview of the site, an overview of the participation and comments we received, and then go into explaining the two concepts which Heidi and Marco are going to show you, along with images that help explain what the concepts are trying to achieve. So if we go to the next slide, Heidi is going to be running the slides as the three of us present. So the site is Lot E, and Lot E is the parking lot behind the stores along Burlingame Avenue and next to the historical post office. And as you can see, it's bounded by Park and Lorton in the heart of downtown. Next. So there's a proposed building, a proposed project right next to Lot E, which incorporates parts of the historic post office and will serve as one of the edges for the new town square. And one other thing to note on this drawing is that there's a gray line that goes through it, and that is the culvert that holds Burlingame Creek that runs under the site, and we can't build on top of it. Next. We had many ways of trying to get as much input as we could, and the community did definitely respond. It was quite wonderful. We were out masked on the Burlingame Avenue and Park Road during a couple of the market days. We had two meetings on November 18th and December 1st. And of course, we had the website. Go to the next one, please. And we had over 3,700 responses of visits, I would say. And then of that, over 200 responses. And you can see on the bottom of this slide, the project website. And it's important to note that a complete report of what the results were from all the surveys will be posted as a link on that website on Monday. In addition, after you take a look at the concepts we're showing today, we're going to have a new survey, very brief, only a few questions, to get comments about the concepts today. Next. So briefly, people thought around Burlingame that this really needed to be social, family friendly, welcoming, caring, all those words. And it should be essentially a single space, have trees because Burlingame is known as a city of trees, a place to gather, meet friends, have festivals, including having a farmer's market expand into it, have performances, have an interactive water feature, and public art. We go to the next slide. It shows that the survey, as you'll see in that report linked to the project website, helps you put it into pie charts. So you can see the big four there are just what I talked about: place to eat and have a drink, green space, a place for events, and to hang out and meet friends. And if we go to the next one, we got a little bit more detailed to say, well, what kind of activities? And there was a long list. Nothing really dominated over anything else, except you can see sitting and relaxing in the upper left was as big a favor as any of the others, but it really wanted to be relatively all-inclusive. So now we're going to take you right to the concepts. Heidi?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. We developed two different concepts that we're going to talk about right now. One is called the curve, the other one, the grove. This was coming out of all the public input that we received, as well as work with a subcommittee. And before we dive into those, I just want to mention the site itself has a few things to think about. It actually slopes from Park Road to Lorton Avenue. You see the culvert in the middle that we can't build on. And then the proposed building will be on this parcel right here, which also means that the Lorton side will be a little bit more in the shade than the Park Road side. Is something to keep in mind when we're looking at the concepts. And this is the proposed building, and we're just showing what the interface would look like with the plaza. So you see that on the ground floor, there is going to be retail users, the old post office wings that are going to be preserved, are going to have retail or some sort of dining, as well as some terraces going down to the plaza, because there is a elevation change. So the post office sits a little bit higher than the plaza itself. And the first option that we would like to present today is called the curve. I want to mention that both schemes have very similar elements. They're all kind of based on what we have heard, but they have a little bit of a different configuration. So the curve here introduces a very slight curve of trees. Trees is something that was very important to everyone. It does include a water feature near the Lawton Avenue side. This part will sit in the sun, so that will be a nice area for water feature. There's also the idea that the businesses that are currently fronting on Burlingame Avenue would have the opportunity to open up to the back, to the new plaza, and offer some opportunities for outdoor seating and eating and dining and drinking on that side. On the post office side, there will be a terrace extending out for outdoor dining, and it terraces down to the plaza. And this is going to be all one level. We have heard from the public input that people love the idea of having one plaza that reads as one plaza, not like two different spaces. And so that's what we were trying to do here. There is another water feature that could be right here in the center. And the curve of trees is a nice way to kind of guide people also from Park Road to Lawton as a connection. And yeah.
Heidi, this is Michael. Can I just make a quick
sure, yes,
comment for colleagues? So in the course of doing this work, the property owners on Burlingame Avenue agreed that it would be much better for all concerned if the trash receptacles behind their buildings were consolidated in a trash corral. And therefore that alley back there is really considered for both designs part of the town square. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good comment. Another thing I want to mention too, that the Yves Delorme building currently has, there's no real windows on that side. So the idea was that maybe that we screen this. There's also some parking area behind the Yves Delorme building. The idea is that to introduce a green wall there. So once you sit on the terraces, you would not look at the building directly, but at a green wall. And we're going to show you some images for what that would look like. This is the same design, just the idea like during a festival or a farmer's market to show how the booths or stands could distribute over the plaza. So the spacing is just that this easily fits. It also has a space for a mobile stage that could be sitting somewhere here or in the center, depending on what kind of performance we're going to have. This could be arranged either way. You could also sit right here, right across the terraces. And this is just showing you the entire plan, how it would look like. You see a little bit better here how the two buildings are framing the plaza and all the features that we're thinking. So it's a very green connection right here with a curved row of trees, as well as some more trees right where the dining happens on the lawn side, on the back side of the businesses. And everything else in terms of the post office will remain the same. The entrance, there will be this expansion of terrace, and then it comes down. The terrace is envisioned to be a green terrace, so you can sit on all of these steps and enjoy the view. And I'm going to hand it over to Marco, who is going to give you a little bit more detail about this concept.
Thank you, Heidi, and good morning, everyone. So I think the plan started to give you a sense of how the site geometry relates and which frontages have storefronts and which ones are solid. You can see the view here from Park Road, the Yves Delorme building with the residences above on the left and the post office on the right, and existing Lot E in the middle, and then the transformation, how that transforms in this concept. As Heidi mentioned, the post office lobby is about 4 feet above the sidewalk level and nominal town square level. So imagine terraces cascading down, both to give people a place to sit and activate the edge of the ground plane, as well as to have diners be up at the lobby level, which is likely to be an F&B business. As Heidi mentioned, the Yves Delorme building is, we're looking at the side there, and We've actually talked with the owners about how can we, shall we say, complete the side of that building. One of the things that we can do as part of the square is potentially have a planted edge or a green wall, and you can see the curve of trees. The curve basically spans between the Burlingame Creek culvert and the wall of the building and the parking yard of the building. It kind of creates that curve that lends through, and you can see the overhead web of string lights that connect through block. And then underneath the curve of trees, you can see people in lounge chairs that are available to the public to meet and to socialize. And as Heidi showed, we can add, there's enough room in here to have the market that occurs on Park Road extend into the site, as well as other festivals. So with that, I'll like to take you to the Lorton Avenue side. Here you can see the side of the Sephora building, or sometimes known as the Burlingame Hotel. The Primero's Tacos is in the very lower bottom there on the right. And then the future 220 Park development would be on the kind of the left edge of the photo. You can see the existing lobby. Also note that the back of the Yves Delorme building and the parking yard is something that we've been kind of working around. And as Councilmember Brownrigg mentioned, we're very fortunate to have the idea of being able to eliminate all those trash corrals that you can see kind of in red there. So here's the transformation. And imagine the ground level storefront spilling out with adjacent dining. You could have families and all members of the community kind of eating there. This particular concept has a playful interactive fountain in the middle. That's sort of the white foamy jets there. The kids would be attracted to that. It's really very playful. You can see the double curve extending all the way to this side and the web lights above. So really wonderfully surrounded. Of course, where the viewer is, where we are, there's also restaurants on that side. So you're kind of creating this three-sided town square outdoor room that we think could be quite activated. It's about 100 feet wide. So it's something that we can really activate with the energy that's already downtown. Next, please. As Heidi mentioned, we have a lot of elements that are kind of common to both, but the idea of having a curved row of trees, of course, not this species and not this exact look, but just the idea of this curved row. Next, please. And what if the curved row had below it seating, not this seating, but just the idea of being able to gather underneath a grand curved row. Next, please. And because we're on that sunny side, can we have, some flowering shrubs at the base of that curved row of trees to really make it quite striking? This happens to be lavender, which I think could grow well on that sunny side. There are other things that could grow well as well. Next, please. And the idea of a green wall, maybe half the size, not quite as big as at SF MoMA, but really a wonderful device to kind of frame that edge, which is likely to be the parking yard, and the blank side of that one building is unlikely to change. So this is a way to really make it a wonderful thing to look at from the post office terraces. Next, please. And then also a device that's been successfully used. This is, of course, Paley Park and Manhattan, a water wall. I think this would be a wonderful element on another edge of the potentially cladding the parking yard in some way and activating part of the square, the sound, the sparkle from the water cascading down. And you can see how people are drawn to these kinds of spaces. And we think that a certain amount of built-in communal tables would be wonderful. People can take out from restaurants, or depending on the subtleties of how you interact with the adjacent owners, people can serve out. So I think we see a certain amount of communal tables and a certain amount of loose tables and chairs in the square. And it wants to be warm and modern, we think. Very, very human scale, very activated by people because it's downtown, but it should have a modern expression. So we're always looking for ways to create comfortable zones, but have it be in a fresh expression. And this is a hint of the more likely lounge furniture under the double row of trees that we're kind of wondering about. This would be independent of any business that's along the square. And then here's a hint of an interactive fountain that isn't necessarily something that's iconic as a shape, but just fun and could be kind of located between the outdoor dining areas. And a hint of the overhead lights that we think can strengthen that curve from block to block. And of course, we love integrating the ability to have markets. We understand the scale so that we get it right in the day-to-day, but it's just big enough that you can add the 10 by 10 tents for the markets, for holiday fair, for book fair, for any number of things that can happen in the square. And again, we do have this dimensional puzzle of having the post office lobby be high, but that offers an opportunity to allow people to kind of sit sort of amphitheater seating along the square. And I think that, you know, the upper level by its nature needs to support the business and the post office lobby, but the other edges can be used for the public to sit and enjoy people walking by in the square and really be a wonderful kind of edge. And if it's possible, we think that some kind of permanent public art would be wonderful somewhere in the plaza. And that, of course, exactly the form of that would have to evolve with the design.
Thank you, Marco. The second option that we thought has a lot of elements that Marco just showed you, but has a very different feel because it's much more, I wouldn't say formal, but a little bit more linear. And we call that the grove. And as the name suggests, it's because there is a grove. The grove would be just a very dense set of trees right here on the Lawton Avenue side. And everything is a little bit more orthogonal than compared to the first option that we showed you. The idea is really to kind of create a nice green room here with the grove of trees. The same idea that businesses spill out onto the plaza, same thing here on the 220 Parkside Road. The grove could be used for all kinds of things, for play and sitting. There's a row of like customized furniture that could be built in right here. The water feature would be oriented towards the grove. In the center, there could be a stage or seating element that is flexible enough. And then the row of trees goes from Lawton down to Park, really creating a very nice connection right here. Along the green wall that we still have in this solution as well, would create more opportunities for seating, and maybe even the rooms are a little bit different from the planting point of view. And one of the main features here would be a water fountain that's more like an interactive water fountain with water jets. We're going to see some images for how that would look like. And again, this entire space here would also have these overhead lights stringing through the grove of trees. The terrace in this one is pretty much the same that we have shown you in the first option. So again, the dining would spill out right here on the terrace, and then it cascades down with a green terrace towards the plaza. And same thing here, during market days or festival or performances, we can arrange booths on the plaza itself. So that the arrangement looks just a little bit different, but it's the same idea that it would actually be along the connection from Park to Lawton. And this is an overview again, how you see it with the edges, how this all works. It emphasizes the linearity of the plaza a little bit more, creates this green space right here. And Marco, if you please walk through some more of the examples for this option.
And if I could interrupt for just a sec, we do want to make sure we have time for the public to comment and such. So I know the second alternative, maybe we can go through a little more quickly. Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, so here we are on the Park Road side again, and the transformation. In this concept, with the linear extension of the Grove beyond, the idea of these arcing jets, very iconic. Of course, you can turn the jets off and use that space. Next, please. And from the Lorton Avenue side, the grove of trees with the web of string lights above and the kind of the custom furniture connecting all the way through, and you can see the brightness of the water wall in the middle right and the arcing jets in the middle left. Next, please. And so a lot of the same images that I showed you before apply here, but of course the feeling of the grove, of a grid of deciduous trees, providing shade in summer and drop their leaves in winter to provide more sun, of course, could be a great element to light during holidays. And the idea of having really a substantial custom wood furniture element that extends through the plaza, like in the middle of the photo there, or something like this. And then in addition to the communal tables, which we showed earlier, we also think that there's some very flexible, warm cafe tables and chairs that could occur, again, relating to the businesses spilling out into the edges of the square. And here's a notion of what those arcing jets could be. Again, this would be sort of over the Burlingame Creek culvert, but with all the mechanical system of the fountain being on one side of it. And while it's iconic and civic, it's also playful. And if you turn it off in 20, 30 minutes, the water evaporates from the surface, and it's a flexible area for performances and markets and festivals. And either as a built-in seating platform or as a small removable stage, we're thinking of accommodating performances of about this scale. And then, as Heidi mentioned, underneath the grove of trees, in addition to dining and socializing, there's space for cornhole, for ping pong, giant chess, foosball, things like that. It can be really fun. We've really enjoyed adding these kinds of things into social spaces, and we think it's just fun to be around, and it makes it inviting for all the different people that visit of all ages. And in addition to permanent art, maybe there's also an opportunity to introduce temporary art in addition to performances, markets, and festivals. That can also be a draw during sort of shoulder season, shall we say.
So thank you, Heidi and Marco. The last two slides. Once again, here is the project website to look at the survey from what has been done till today, and then about these two schemes, a very brief survey. Next. And the next meeting will be May 3rd, City Council meeting, a Monday evening, which will be a public meeting also considering what you just saw. Thank you very much. Now it's time for comments and discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller. I'm going to start first with my colleagues to see if anyone has questions. And then after that is done, I will open it up for public comment. And this item is to end at 10 o'clock, so please be mindful of time. I have one quick question. In regard to the area against the Yves de Lore, those trees, are they going to be high enough that, let's say, if we decide later on to do project movies on a screen or a wall, would that be possible? because you do have a lot of seating across the way. So it might be an opportune area to be able to do that.
I can answer that briefly. I think that when the trees are young, of course, the canopies are low enough that it would be maybe a smaller movie. But as the trees grow up over time, the trees will be a scale where you could use a good portion of the facade of the building in, say, 10 years. Initially, it might be somewhat, dappled by it.
And you might find that instead of the continuous row of trees, you might leave 2 out and have movies if that's really desired.
Okay, very good. So to my colleagues, does anyone have a question before I open it up for comments and questions from the public? Or actually comments from the public? Okay, okay, here we go. Let's start with Vice Chair Terrace, followed by Councilmember Beach, followed by Councilmember Browner, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So question in regards to procedure or whatever, are we discussing at all budget at this point, or even at just a high level? Or maybe I should just go ahead and ask my question. But here's my question. It seems to me, looking at these schemes, there probably isn't a huge difference in cost when you get to the point of estimating and budgeting for these 2 projects. But the general question that I have is, if we're looking at a little under 30,000 square feet, my reading of the staff report is that there's a $2 million contribution that's coming from the building developer. Is the anticipation that that $2 million covers the entirety of this cost at about $70 a square foot? And if so, my question for the design team is, based on your experience, would you anticipate that solutions like these could be achieved for approximately that budget?
Well, I could answer that question to start. So what we've done here is shown something which has a lot of different features in it, all of which don't have to be included. So we've given you the sort of the menu of many different things that were asked for. And the question will be, when are all those features included? In other words, it could be this is a staggered budget, or that we don't build it all. I think that the 2 million is pretty rudimentary when it comes to much of this, but there are also pieces of this which are worked with the project next door. For instance, those terraces you see with the post office, a lot of which are going to be included with what they build, as I understand it, in addition to the 2 million that they've offered. But there's a lot to be worked out, obviously, on the budget.
Okay, then I'll back out of that question and leave that for a later date for further discussion. My other question is just relatively minor. Is, there's a little excitement about the idea of the cornhole, the ping pong, and some of the other activities that you mentioned with the Grove scheme. Is there a reason why those things couldn't occur with the Curve scheme? Or is your sense that the Grove gives you a little bit larger room for those things to happen?
Well, it's interesting you say that. In trying different schemes, we saw that the orthogonal scheme just gives you a little more flexibility and space in what you include, but the Curve scheme has a statement about it too. So in giving the options, it seemed that you could include some of it. Whether you can include all and then in what configuration, that would be different.
Okay.
It doesn't mutually exclusive. For instance, you see that fountain under the trees there on that scheme. Well, what if the fountain weren't there, but you instead had a water wall at the end? What these schemes provide is a framework upon which you can add various combination of elements.
Okay. So Kevin or Madam Mayor, do you want comments at this point, or?
No, I don't want comments at this point because I want to make sure I have enough time for the public. So I just kind of want to start with quick questions first from my colleagues and then jump to the public to get their feedback, and then we'll jump back again. Okay, Councilmember Beach.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First of all, I found myself saying yes to everything in my mind. These designs are super exciting. So compliments to the team and the subcommittee. My question was along the lines of Commissioner Terrace. Is there any other thing you can point out to us, design team, if we lean towards either the Curve or the Grove, that those designs intrinsically limit certain decisions. So I heard some differences in types of water feature, different types of fixed seating. Is it really just aesthetic? Do we like the vibe of the curb, or are there limitations you start to constrain when you choose one design or the other? Thank you.
I could start out with that one briefly. One of the things that came across is that people wanted to feel like one space, and therefore the connection from Lorton to Park was important. And so we were trying to think of different ways to tie the two spaces together and make that linkage, but still keep it optional for many different things to happen. I don't think there's something intrinsically that says either scheme would preclude all the features you like that could be included. You'll see though that, we've done several things like where the lights make this sort of canopy of light above the string lights. You can see where the other kind of fountains are and how different spaces sort of open up more toward Lorton with this curve scheme, for instance. But no, there's nothing intrinsically that says, boy, that scheme really eliminates this feature, which I really love.
Thank you for just crystallizing that. I appreciate it.
Okay, I will move on to Commissioner Schmid, please.
Yes, thank you. I'm curious about the materials that we're talking for the ground. Are we thinking something that's going to be more concrete and solid, or something more of a sand or dirt, or something like that?
We've had very preliminary discussions about that, but we're not that far along. That we'll get back actually the first question, of course. But we've talked, for instance, with the city about, do you like Burlingame Avenue? Do you not? What's the problems? We've had preliminary discussions, but we've certainly not chosen yet.
Because just thinking, if that were going to be 30,000 square feet of concrete, largely, to make it, I think having a concrete will make it easier to keep it clean and neat, and it will wear better. But that's a lot of money into that piece of it before you even get to all the rest of it. And I think that coming back to Commissioner Taranos's comment about the budget is probably figuring out what the first 2 million buys and what you need as a base versus the discretionary items that would be part of the menu later, that would be those things that we'd have to make a decision on from a budgetary standpoint.
Right. Well, know that what we've drawn here, like underneath the trees, has what Marco was describing as other kinds of soft landscaping, not necessarily what you walk on. But what we found is this space is not that large, and with a lot of the different activities, it's probably going to be a harder scape than a softer scape, but it doesn't mean it all has to be a pavement. So that's one of the big questions we'll keep exploring.
And does the culvert then make a piece to that as well? Is there anything preventing us from, doing a hardscape over the culvert, or is it just that we can't build?
That's certainly possible. We just can't build buildings on it, or they're planting a tree over it won't work. That's why you don't see any trees directly. Right. But yes, you could do that.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Brownrick. You're on mute.
I beg your pardon.
There you go.
Just two quick comments because budget has come up. Well, first of all, welcome also to the newest member of the Planning Commission, Ray Larios, who's in the audience, just to acknowledge him as well as our other participants. With respect to budget, the subcommittee did not, we haven't gotten to the sharp pencil stage, but there are a lot of elements here that are not all that expensive. So the grove sitting, trees sitting in pavers is just not an inherently very expensive area. The water features are expensive. So this is something we'll drill into probably on May 3rd with council. But I would say that, and Councilwoman Colson can add her point of view, but I would say that each of these designs, we believe, are within striking distance of the 2 million, and then probably some additional capital that could be found philanthropically or in the city budget, but none of them are like $8 million. I don't want you to have the impression that this is well beyond where we are in terms of the money we already have allocated for it.
Okay, do we have anyone else from my colleagues before I move on to public comment? Because I don't think I've heard from Councilmember Coulson, and it's Councilmember Coulson and Councilmember Brownrigg that have been involved in this from the very beginning. So I just want to make sure before I switch over to public comment, Councilmember Coulson has a chance to ask a question or make a quick comment.
No, I'm fine,
Okay.
thank you. I'd really just like to hear what the public has to think at this point. I love
Okay.
both these lines, so.
Very good. Okay, thank you. All right, so I am going to hop on over to public comment and open that up. It is 9:45, so whoever wants to raise their hand, please do so now so I can kind of see how many people want to speak. Okay, so at this time I see 2 people, so I'm going to go with the 3 minutes for
Madam
your,
Mayor, sorry
Yes.
to interrupt, but there are some questions in the chat.
okay. For the
Public-
people in chat, can you raise your hand? Because it's just easier to go by raised hands rather than trying to read the chat. Because some of the chat isn't exactly questions either, so it might be better. Plus, I do like to get on record who is speaking. All right, we are going to start with the first hand that was raised, and it's a number 957-551. So can you unmute yourself, please? Hello? Okay, you haven't unmuted yourself, so you want to try again?
Madam Mayor, it's *6 to unmute.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Okay. Okay, what I'm going to do, I'm going to skip over 957-551, and then when you can get in, we'll just let you in. So Jennifer Pfaff, you are the next person that can speak.
Am I there? Hear me? Yes.
There you go.
Thank you very much, and very nice job from this company. Good job on both of them. I just wanted to say the Yves DeLorean building, just for the record, is a Norberg building, and yeah, it's the side of the building, but it's kind of a nice building. So just to keep that in mind. I do like both of the designs a lot. I have a preference personally for the curve and for less activity, just because I don't think it's that big of an area just being in it. However, just as the planning commissioners, a couple of them, or at least one of them, asked about the materials, there's something about having geometric materials, but with curves over them that might maybe not look quite as open and nice, or as if it were softer, like a ground material below. And it doesn't sound like that's the direction this is going. So, but generally I prefer the curve, but they're both beautiful. The other one looks a little like a beer garden. That could be good, or it could be just a little more constrained. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you for a great job.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm going to try back to 957-551. You could ask your question or make a comment right now. Okay.
He's trying to unmute.
Why don't we go? I thought, yeah, we have you unmuted. So you want to try to speak? All right, so this 957-551, is this Nancy and Jeff?
I think so.
Okay,
Hi, everybody. Hopefully you can hear us.
yes.
Hey, I've gotten a thumbs up. First of all, really appreciate the opportunity to speak about this, and really did enjoy looking at the designs. I think we are interested in the Grove design, really like the way that that plays. And one of the questions that I had was if there's an opportunity to see a breakdown of the square footage for the different spaces and try to understand kind of the variation between the Curve and the Grove as to the offering that it provides from a seating standpoint, from a gaming area standpoint, from, you know, architectural space. So I think that would help to play into it, but we really like the functionality of the Grove design.
Great. Thank you very much, Jeff. Appreciate the feedback. Next, we have Stephanie Lee.
Hi, yes, I really liked both designs. I think you did a lovely job. And while I love the appearance and draw in of water features, I am concerned that in drought conditions in other cities, I've seen they've had to be turned off and then the place just looks dry and desolate. It seemed like the arcing water could be turned off and it wouldn't really, change the appearance that much. I wonder about the water wall and the other ones' water features, if those have to be turned off. How does that change the ambiance? And also how much water is being used or would be used by those?
Those are
If
good
appropriate,
questions.
I can answer
Yes,
briefly
that'd be great.
on just the magnitude of water use. Think about it, about one household's worth of water use because of evaporation. The water would be circulated and filtered, and so it's reused, but of course there is evaporation.
Stephanie, can I ask you a question? Did you have a preference between the two options?
I liked features of both of them. So I loved the curved part of the trees. I liked all the exchange, the social exchange in the second one. So I can't say that I have a strong preference.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Stephanie. All right. For the Nancy and Jeff, I still see your hand raised. Are you good? Or did you have something to add quickly?
Nope, we just haven't taken our hand down.
Okay, very good. Thank you. All right. Before I switch back to my colleagues, is there anyone else in attendance from the public that would like to speak? Okay, it doesn't look like it. So I'm going to go back to my colleagues and I'm going to start with Councilmember Coulson, followed by followed by Vice Mayor Ortiz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I'm really just open to public commentary around both of these options. I think the design team did a really nice job of bringing in all the elements that the public has requested into versions that, while similar, are uniquely different so that they do provide, two different kinds of feelings. With regard to the water walls, to Commissioner Lee's question, one option that we talked about was to have behind the water wall sort of like an artsy feel, whether it's, glass or tile or, sort of a cement that's got texture to it or something, so that in the event that the water were to have to be turned off, the wall would still be artistic, almost like an art, and it would light up still at night and still give you that sense of destination through the grove of trees, so that your eyes would still be drawn visually toward the back, whether water was in it or not. It would have more of an art feature as well as water.
Vice Mayor Ortiz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm looking at both options. They both have really great things to them, but I am leaning towards the curve. I think the linkage between Park and Lorton works better with the curve. And then when I'm looking at the arches, the interactive water feature with the arches, and I just can't there's very few days in Burlingame where it's going to be hot enough for people to really participate in that interaction. And so I would think that especially if it is expensive, that's not the place to put our money in. So I'm leaning it towards the curve, and those water features we have to be careful with.
Okay, I am going to, Councilmember Brownrick, if you don't mind, I'm going to skip over you and go to Commissioner Loftus, just because he hasn't had an opportunity to speak, and then I'll revert back.
So I much prefer the Grove to the other solution. The curve solution, it feels like a solution in search of a problem. A couple of things were said by the design team that are signals for me. The notion that the curve guides people is a sort of pinball idea of architecture I've never bought into. And another term that was used for the curve was it was a statement. And I think that's in fact the problem with it. It's very willful geometry. As I said, it feels like it's a solution in search of a problem. The Paley Park is a fantastic example to put forward, and the curve is thoroughly unlike Paley Park, which is a simple grid, orthogonal grid of trees. And the orthogonal grid, the grove, feels much more comfortable in this orthogonal space. And I'm a big proponent of clarity and legibility in public space. And I think the grove does that in a way that the curve doesn't. The curve is a much more willful design solution. And I worry a little bit about buyer's remorse. You know, I don't think that it's not a classic solution in the same way that the grove of trees, a simple grove of trees as a background for human activity is. It's trying to be something that I don't think we really need personally.
Thank you. Next, I'm actually going to call on the planning chair, Audrey.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you to the design team for coming up with two very nice and different plans, accommodating all the many wishes of our city. There are aspects that I like of each plan, but overall, I like the Grove plan. I think that we have some, complicated space, and that we have kind of two rectangles kind of meeting and squeezing at the waist in the middle. And we have to think about how people are going to traverse this space from one street to another. And the simplicity of a more geometrical layout would make sense from kind of a pass-through space. And on that note, in terms of using the space as a pass-through, as well as, of course, all the engagement of hanging out together and playing and enjoying the space, is that the water feature that's being proposed, the arced water feature, maybe feels tight in that particular space. We have, a nice public space, but it's not huge. And I would worry about potential water overspray. People might avoid walking through the space, worry they're going to get splashed by kids running through the space or whatever. And I feel that in that particular part of the public area, that we should allow more movement, people to meet and then continue their path through the space, enjoy the grove of trees and the seating underneath when they'd like to, but really going to utilize that as a pass-through. I do want to make note that I do like some of the things that you've thought about, like the green wall that would help to absorb noise in the area. And of course, the grove of trees will help to absorb noise, as well as provide privacy for those residential spaces that are up above in the buildings nearby, the hotel, and the spaces above the Yves Delorme space. So I appreciate that. And I also want to just comment really quickly that although we have many desires for this area, that we should be careful about over-programming this space. Keeping it simple and flexible would probably be more useful for us and give us the ability to flex as we need to. But thank you so much for this nice presentation.
Thank you, Audrey. Let's go with Commissioner Camarado.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for the beautiful presentation. I actually agree with Chair Say. So I think we need to keep it simple. I like the Grove idea. I think more flexible space. I love the green wall. I would love to see some lighting in the green wall, because I think that would add a lot of lights can do a number, and we can kind of control how light and bright things are. Maybe a little bit more as the evening goes on, it gets a little darker in the summer times, and we can really utilize that space much better. And I really like the simplicity of the Grove. My big, I'd like to see a little bit more detail about the garbage cans. where those are, where exactly they're located, how the structure is going to be built around the garbage cans. Is there anything that we can do with odor and animals? And,
it's 10 o'clock.
Sorry, and bees and flies and all that stuff. So I kind of want to see if there's anything that we can do to control the smell of those garbage cans and the facility around it. Thank you, everyone. Good morning.
Thank you, Commissioner Camerado. Okay, we have hit the 10 o'clock mark and it looks like I still have quite a few people to call on. So, and I do want to make sure we have enough time for the rest of our subjects on our agenda and not go over too much. So I will call on the rest of the people that have their hands up. Let's try to strive to get this done by 10:15. So we'll do another 15 minutes because this is an important project. And I do want to hear the feedback from everyone today. Now, granted, we will be, talking about this again on May 3rd. All right, so let's go back to Councilmember Brownrigg, followed by Councilmember Coulson, and then Councilmember Beach.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I'll try to be quick. And I would encourage Commissioner Terrace to go ahead and speak, since I thank you for creating the additional time. But just briefly,
sorry, Commissioner or Vice Chair Terrace, I didn't see your hand, so I might have just overlooked that. So you are in the queue.
I chatted.
Yeah, you did. And then
okay.
Okay. Just briefly, I wanted to just take a step back for a second to remind ourselves, because Councilwoman Coulson and I have, through the public process, received a certain amount of criticism. Why are we doing this now, given budget and stuff, and with the indication or on some parts that this is sort of frivolous. And I just want to speak to 2 points about that. One, this has been a priority for our city since 2010, when we did the downtown specific plan that engaged hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of residents and hours. But two, I really think of this as an investment both in civic life, to be able to create public open space like this, gathering place for public speech, for events and so forth. I think that's a remarkable opportunity. But I also think it's an investment in all of our downtown, because we collectively need to find reasons for people to come downtown, especially as retail is changing, and we all know this. And I think this is a tremendous investment in our entire downtown. So I'm not justifying it based on the economic impact, but I am saying, as we think about making this investment, it's not just an investment in any old park. This is an investment in our whole downtown. So I'm really delighted with where we are, and I really appreciate all the thoughtful comments so far. And I won't express a preference, but I really appreciate the input.
Councilmember Coulson.
Thank you. So I just have a quick response back to Commissioner Camerado's concern around the trash receptacle, which is that one of the reasons on the Grove design, we put the water feature right to the adjacent side of that, was that the noise and gurgling would reduce some of that noise with people moving trash in and out. So it would be a way to mask sort of noise. And also it creates kind of a buffer for, like, as you point out, potentially, just activity that's going on around back there. So that location of the water feature was very specific and certain as to why we put it there, in addition to the fact that it just works with the elongated element. And then with regard to Commissioner Lee's comment regarding the water feature, I particularly appreciate her comment as a Park and Rec Commissioner. And I do understand there was a lot of discussion about the concern about, overspray and water. It's potentially that would be off most days. So I think as we discuss in the final conversations around cost, that I would agree with her that if there was an element to reduce or remove, that might be one that we could reduce, simply because of the cost element of it. And it feels a little crammed in. And then finally, with regard to cost, I will say we're having a lot of success with the community coming out to support the community center capital campaign. So I feel that if that project winds up in a really successful way, there may be a way to use that model over here for the square, so that we would eventually have potential donors that could help bridge any cost gap, and it wouldn't be on the taxpayers.
Thank you, Councilmember Coulson. Councilmember Beach.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. 4 quick points. Love both the designs. Don't feel strongly right now. Like Councilmember Coulson, I'm eager to hear what the community has to say. And I'm also very much value the planning commissioner's opinions too. So number 2, on the water feature, I don't know what it will look like or what the final design would be, but I feel very strongly that the great community civic spaces around the world, whether it's in Europe or elsewhere, have some kind of a water feature. I think they add a tremendous dimension. So I hope if we can do it responsibly, where we're recycling water, where we turn it off sometimes, where it's multi-use, that we include that somehow, because I think that is such a draw and such an important thing. 3, I love the green wall. I think that's fabulous. That is so Burlingame and it makes it beautiful. And 4, as we balance communal seating, permanent stuff versus flexible space, I just want to make sure that, as Councilmember Brownrigg said, that we're investing in really civic engagement and communal space that isn't just space where restaurants are sort of monetizing the space. I hope that we can really have some beautiful public seating where people can, I think we're headed in that direction, but I think that that's a really thing that I would value a lot. So eager to hear what the community has to say. Thanks.
Okay, is there anyone else? I know Commissioner Gall, I don't think you have spoken. Did you want to add anything at all?
No, I really don't have a feeling either way, but I do appreciate the comments from my fellow commissioners, especially Commissioner Loftus. I think he had a real good insight into not trying to make it more than what it really is. So, but I like the overall presentation. I'm looking forward to this moving forward.
Great, thank you. I appreciate all the comments from the public and my colleagues. I think both options are very nice. I have a tendency to like simplicity and structure, and so I think the Grove expresses that. But there's good elements in both. I will say what I do like is the concept of temporary art. Something that we can switch in and switch out and maybe focus on local artists that we have in the city of Burlingame to really show off their talents. So I think that might be something we may want to keep in mind for utilizing either option that we may, decide, futuristically. So again, just want to mention that this will be discussed at our May 3rd council meeting. I do appreciate our presenters this morning. I thought that was very good presentation of both these options. And I encourage the public to attend our city council meeting on the 3rd of May so we can hear some more feedback. All right. On that note, next on our agenda is the life science use in the Bayfront. And so, Kevin, you will be presenting that, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and I just want to mention this has come before us because of the interest in our Bayfront of developing some life science, and it's something that we haven't had in the past, but the council wanted to educate themselves in regards to what life science is. What do these buildings require, and in deciding potential FAR, where does that fit in what we have now at the Bayfront. So this is really more of an educational component today, not in regards to making a decision. Okay, Kevin, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor O'Brien, members of the City Council and the Planning Commission. As Mayor O'Brien just said, life science has been a big topic here in the Bayfront on Burlingame, and there have been kind of 2 parallel discussions, and we'll kind of touch on both of them. One has been, as the Mayor said, kind of just general interest in life science, given that we haven't had a lot. There has also been a specific question as to FARs and on a certain strip of properties, which I'll also show. So hopefully everyone can see the screen. If not, let me know. Now, the Bayfront under the new general plan has 2 land use districts. There's Bayfront Commercial and Innovation Industrial. Both of them do allow life sciences. The orientation of Bayfront Commercial is a little more towards kind of big offices and hotels, and it's more the kind of commercial. Innovation Industrial is perhaps, it is meant to be the place for industrial uses to basically have a safe space to operate here in Burlingame. So we do have a place for those kinds of uses, but it also allows labs and those kinds of, maybe it's a different flavor of life science. Where this conversation, kind of became very specific is looking at these properties fronting Old Bayshore Highway. And in particular, there's a kind of discrepancy in the floor area ratios between what's in the Bayfront Commercial along the waterfront, where you can have either office and research and development up to 3.0 floor area ratio, whereas on the other side of the highway are offices and research and development up to 0.75, but hotels are also up to 3. And the thinking behind that is the Innovation Industrial is a lower scale area, so that's why the lower floor area. However, traditionally this strip of land, the properties fronting Old Bayshore Highway tend to be a kind of, it's almost like a sub-district, in particular with that hotel allowance of up to 3.0. It's considered a sort of transition between the Bayfront Commercial on the other side, and maybe it's either a buffer or transition to the Innovation Industrial further back. A lot of words here. It's in the staff report, so I'm not going to go through it. But in our draft zoning ordinance, which you will all start seeing very soon, starting next month, we have a couple of definitions, and there's, again, kind of maybe 2 flavors to life science, biotech, research and development. There's a lot of kind of similar terms. One is maybe more office focused and is more research and development with some testing and studying. The other is more lab-based and starts to get more into prototyping assemblies from off-site. So it's got that kind of a little more industrial character. What do these buildings look like? These are just 2 that came off of Google image search, and generally they look like typical office buildings. Maybe the one exception and defining feature is you'll see these fairly prominent mechanical penthouses on top. That's required for the life science uses in that there's a lot more mechanical, there's a lot of air circulation and mechanical needs that a typical general office building will not have. So now we've seen these, we have a couple here in Burlingame, one approved and one proposed. Burlingame Point, for those on the Planning Commission will recall, it was either during construction or just prior to construction, 2 of the buildings were sort of retrofitted to allow or accommodate life science uses. And at that point, some mechanical penthouses were added to those buildings. As it turns out, they won't be used by this current tenant for that kind of application, but the buildings are set up for that. 567 Airport Boulevard is a proposal that is going through the Planning Commission right now, which has also been designed. It is a speculative building. It doesn't have a tenant, but it is designed to accommodate life science uses or general office uses, either one. The staff report had a bunch of questions about, what are labs? What are the proportions of labs? And I'm going to hold off on answering these questions because we do have 2 guest speakers who speak from experience and will be able to answer quite a few of these. We can always come back to these, but we do want to defer to those that are in the know the most. So we just want to acknowledge that is something we want to cover in this presentation. But back to the floor area ratio, just a quick overview for FAR is one of these acronym terms that gets thrown around in planning circles, but it's generally the ratio of building area to site area. This is a diagram that shows up in our general plan. It can mean a lot of different things. You can see that it's basically a number, and it doesn't necessarily reflect the look or the mass of a project. So you can see there in the foreground a 0.5 FAR. Building could be a 1-story building that takes up half the site. It could be a 2-story building that takes up a quarter of the site. And the FAR doesn't really tell you which one it is. So it only gives you kind of one piece of the picture. What it does tell you is the intensity of use that allows you to figure out how many employees there might be, parking spaces, all that kind of thing. So again, kind of going back to the discussion within the discussion was trying to figure out, we started with the Economic Development Subcommittee earlier this year, went to the full City Council to really talk about this topic of, should there be a different floor area ratio for these properties fronting Bayshore Highway, Old Bayshore Highway, and that then entered into the discussion of, well, we need to understand a little bit more about what these buildings are, and how could you decide what is the appropriate floor area, given it's such an abstract concept. So some examples that are here in Burlingame. Burlingame Point has the approved FAR is 1.0. If you actually subtract out the area of that S-curve road through the middle, Airport Boulevard, it actually ends up being about 1.23. And that's something that's important. Do you include the street area within a FAR or not? So this was a calculation we did just to try to bring parity with other properties that we're looking at. Now, Marriott Hotel, 11 stories, but an FAR of less than 2. How can that be possible? Well, the reason is that if you see here's the hotel. It's a very dense building, but then practically 2/3 or at least more than half of the site is an open parking area. So again, it's the ratio of land area to building, and it could be a 2.0, could be a low building that covers the entire site, or it could be, in this case, a very tall building at one edge of the site. As an example of a 3.0 FAR is the hotel that was approved in recent years at 1499 Old Bayshore Highway. And I think that's also about the same height as the Marriott, but it has a more intensive use of the site. This picture on the right-hand side shows, you can see it's basically a L-shaped building on top of a parking podium. The parking podium takes up a good part of the site. There's still room for open space along the creek and along the front, but it is a more intensive development of the site than what we saw at Burlingame Point, where it's a lot of parking lots and open space surrounding it, or the Marriott where it's the same kind of thing. So this is maybe a more contemporary example. Burlingame Point was proposed more than 10 years ago, and it kind of reflects what was happening at the time. I'd say this building is more reflective of kind of the land economics and where building intensities tend to be going, at least with hotels, or they were when this project was approved. So to try to figure out FAR, just to again, with all these caveats that the height, everything, there's so many variables, but what is the difference between all of these different FARs? What's the difference between a 0.75 versus a 1.5 versus a 2 or a 3? So we did a series of little diagrams. These are just very simple SketchUp models, so they are not architecturally designed. They are kind of measured out so that we can have a sense of building area and parking area and such. We took a generic 2-acre site that seems to be kind of a typical size of particularly these inner Bayshore Bayshore Highway sites. There are bigger sites, but this is be harder to do something on something much smaller than this. So we've taken a generic 2-acre site. At 0.75 FAR, you can see that it allows the building 87,120, or sorry, 63,340 square feet. In this case, the building takes up, it's about half of the site. It's a 2-story building, probably fairly simple construction. And then the parking, the ratio we're using is 1 space per 500, which is what we're being told the market is demanding. That's kind of the right ratio for life science. It is also a blend. The city's parking ratio for office is 1 to 300, and for labs it's 1 to 800. So if you kind of average it out, 1 to 500 is kind of what we're working with. In this case, it would be a parking deck. You can't quite get all the parking on the surface, but you don't really have to get into a giant structure yet. It's just a 1-story deck. Going up to 1.5, we skipped over 1 because it's pretty close to 0.75. But as we get into higher FARs, you start to get to larger buildings. Maybe the construction type is changing slightly. And then also the parking becomes more of a feature, whether it's a structure or part of the building. So in this case, a 2.0 on a 2-acre site would be a 130,000 plus building with 262 parking spaces. You can see here the building is 4 stories. I should clarify that's a mechanical penthouse on top. And then the parking structure here ends up being about a 3.5-story structure. And when you add it up and kind of measure space per area per space and such. And again, these are simple massing models. They are not, they have not been worked out architecturally, but they are meant to be fairly accurate in terms of just the use of space on a site. Going up to 2.0, there's a couple things happening now. Part of it is the building is becoming taller and changing. You know, we're getting into whether it's a different construction type or just a different approach to the building. It's becoming more of a mid-rise building. And also you start to see more of perhaps the parking podium is integrated into the building. You're having, rather than a building and a garage next to it, you're starting to have a podium where the building is sitting on top of the podium and then maybe wrapping down a little bit on the side. The other thing that this diagram is trying to show is about a year ago, maybe a little more than a year ago, we had a conversation with the council on public benefits or community benefits as floor areas and heights get taller. And the direction from council was to allow perhaps pair community benefits with these larger buildings. So in this case, we're seeing part of the site is allocated to some kind of community space, a plaza, park, something like that. That does squish the building, so you end up getting a taller building, but the idea would be then there's something that the community could also enjoy. Going up to 2.5, we're getting into still more mid-rise construction. In this case, it's a building pretty much entirely on a podium with a little bit of ground floor space just for the streetscape, but generally the building is now raised up pretty high over the parking. This can also be, you know, for the bayfront properties, this is a sea level rise adaptation strategy as well. So with the parking below and the building above, there's some need to do that. Here, the community benefit is more of a strip of land. Maybe it's a linear park, or maybe it's an expanded shoreline, something like that. And then also you can have, you know, the top of your podium can be some kind of open space. This is all just kind of illustrating different approaches to massing and the area. And then finally, at the top of what we've looked at, and we wouldn't suggest going beyond this because the hotels are already at 3.0, Bayfront Commercial is already 3.0. You start to see some similarities with maybe the hotel that we looked at earlier, that it is becoming a taller building. In this case, the parking is really situated into the mass of the building in a way to kind of blend it in architecturally, but also raise up the finished floor areas. And still have something at the base in terms of relating to the street, maybe more open space. Now we've got both our kind of linear park as well as our plaza. So the idea would be that as the building becomes bigger, there may be more community benefits or amenities that would kind of counteract the larger size of the building, but also provide something that's useful to both the people in the building as well as the community around. I know it's a lot to take in. We can always go back. But then the question comes up, transportation, and particularly as we start getting to these higher floor areas. Now the general plan did look at these high floor areas. It had a fairly robust assumptions for development in the bayfront. So it was basically we looked at the land use assumptions and assumed a range of hotels, offices, life science kind of fits in there with industrial uses, with labs. There was assumptions of destination restaurants, commercial recreation. It's all kind of programmed in there. Now, clearly you need to get people there and back. Now, one thing that's interesting with Airport Boulevard and Old Bayshore Highway is it does serve as this kind of a ready-made transit spine. And in fact, it is already serving that way. We have the commute.org shuttles that go along there. And what's really kind of interesting is at the furthest point from, if you get off of a shuttle here at Old Bayshore Highway, you're walking down to something at, maybe all the way at Gilbreth, that's still just a quarter of a mile, which is in the world of transit-oriented development is considered transit proximate. That's within easy proximity of transit. We had some preliminary talks with a commute.org representative to see just what are the options here. And he was actually very excited. He said, this is really kind of ready-made. If you look at the proximity of Broadway Caltrain, Burlingame Caltrain, off the screen here is Millbrae, which also includes BART. In the world of these types of developments, this is very transit ready. And in a combination of transportation demand management and a really robust shuttle system could be very effective at serving these projects. It would also be, there's an environmental review component in that there needs to be some kind of assurance of transportation in order to serve the projects. And that's something that I think the tenants would expect anyways, is given how well used the commute.org shuttle has been in the past, prior pandemic, and we expect after pandemic. The good news was it seems like transportation could work pretty well in this area with and not be a particularly expensive undertaking in the scheme of things. So those are my slides. We do have two guest speakers. So with us is representatives from King Street Properties and Helios Real Estate Partners, and they've prepared some slides to talk particularly about the life science buildings and the ins and outs and nuts and bolts of those buildings. And then we also have a representative from EKN Development Group who is going to talk more, just a few words about more of the economics and particularly life science versus hotel development. And they're speaking from experiences as being the hotel developer of what we just looked at. So what I would suggest, we can either have questions for what we've seen so far and then move to the two guest speakers, or if it's preferred, we could go straight to the guest speakers and then kind of roll all the questions together. It's a little bit of an improvisation here.
Let's, Director Gardner, let's go with the guest speakers. And then I'll go for questions and after those two presentations.
Great. So let's see, I think we've got us rounded up for the first speaker would be Mr. Domenico and Mr. Alvaro. I think Mr. Alvaro is going to make an introduction. And then yes, if you need your slides, hopefully our slide sharing is working. If not, we'll make you a co-host so you can share.
It is not letting me share right now.
Okay, so you are going to become a co-host just for this moment, and that'll allow you to share your slides.
Great, thank you very much. We appreciate the opportunity to speak. My name is Rob Albro with King Street Properties. First of all, we just want to thank the mayor, the vice mayor, council members, planning commission, city staff. We've had the chance to interact with many of you, but we look forward to meeting those we haven't, and look forward to working with everyone in the future. As Kevin kind of set up, we're going to go through a quick presentation today. Our goal is to give a high-level summary of what a life science building is and what it means for the community. We'll do this short presentation and then we'll turn it back over to Kevin, but please feel free to follow up with this after the meeting with any questions. Just a quick background on King Street Properties before we get into the meat of the presentation. We're a leading life science developer in the United States. We have about 4 million feet, predominantly in the Boston, Cambridge market, New York City, the Research Triangle, and the Bay Area. Our projects historically have included ground up development, repurposing of existing buildings, and repositioning of buildings to life science. We only focus on life science and have built our company around that. For this particular project, we're also going to be working with Helios, who's our local partner, and they're working hand in hand with us going forward. We've worked with many municipalities around the country developing life science buildings, but we're particularly excited about this potential for a life science node here in Burlingame. We think Burlingame has all the attributes to be a major force in life science, and we're very excited to be here today. So with that, we'll keep our comments brief, but we'll turn it over to Mike Domenico, my colleague, who's going to go through a few slides. But again, thank you for the time today.
Thanks, Rob. Good morning, everybody. So as part of an overview, we just wanted to make sure that everyone understands what life science space is when we talk about life science. So life science buildings are made up of traditional office space, as you would know it, cubicles, offices, conference rooms, all the typical things you would see in a normal office building. And that's usually about 40 to 60% of the space. And then the remainder of the space is laboratory space. And what that is a clean area that has cleanable surfaces. So for example, it'll have vinyl tiles on the floor instead of carpet. And it has enhanced systems to ensure that there's a high number of air changes to be able to keep experiments clean that are happening within the space. So the infrastructure that's needed to support the work that goes on in those laboratory spaces really drives the design of these buildings. Because there's a lot more air that moves throughout these spaces to keep them clean, the size of the ductwork that runs above the ceilings in each of the spaces is deeper than it would be in a traditional office. So that drives a higher floor-to-floor height than you would see in a traditional office building. Other things that life science tenants need are additional specialty infrastructure, such as high purity water systems, so that they have ultra clean water for their experiments, CO2, compressed air and vacuum, and loading is very important for them as well, to be able to get supplies that they need for their experiments. But one thing to note is that the type of loading that happens at these buildings, typically not big tractor trailers, they're more box trucks that are delivering things like pipettes and beakers and buffers. And due to the nature of the work that's happening inside these spaces, typically these buildings have larger floor plates than a traditional office building, because these companies want to have their office space and their lab space all on the same floor, so that as people are moving in between those two spaces, they're not having to get in an elevator, move up and down. And then for those people that are only working in the office, or the majority of the time they're working in the lab, it creates a better synergy between the people that are working in the office and in the lab space. So what does all that mean for the size of these buildings? Typically, we see that a floor plate of a life science building wants to be somewhere between 30 and 50,000 square feet, so you can accommodate the use for the tenants. Even though there are higher floor-to-floor heights, that doesn't necessarily mean taller buildings. They're sort of shorter and fatter than taller and skinnier. Typical floor-to-floor height is somewhere between 15 and 17 feet. But they're typically somewhere between 4 to 7 stories, so that there's not too much vertical movement with people. People are moving more horizontally. And because people are working in both the lab space and the office space, the population density in these buildings is about half of what they are in a traditional office building. And then that drives parking demand. Mr. Gardner mentioned before that the parking demand for these buildings is less than an office building. And another benefit to life science development is the intensity of how people arrive and leave work. Traditional office buildings, people tend to arrive at 9 in the morning, leave at 5 in the evening, and that is those peak hours are really kind of jammed with the majority of people arriving. In life science buildings, people might be doing experiments at different times during the day. People might be coming in off hours at night, so the trips are spread more evenly through the day. The majority of them are still kind of focused on those main hours, but they're more spread out than an office building would be. So what does life science bring to the community? Life science is a growing industry. It supports a lot of other uses. We've seen in other communities where we've brought in life science development. It really helps support other uses such as, retail and hotel. It also brings a really wide diversity of jobs. A lot of people think when they think of life science, they think that everybody that works in these buildings holds a PhD. But there are people from all educational backgrounds, from all the way from GED up to PhD. There are lab support technicians, and as these companies grow, they need administrative support staff, accounting. So there's really a wide range of jobs that comes out of this. And we think that this is, as Rob said, this is a great area. We're really excited about what this area of Burlingame could become. It has the opportunity to become another life science node where these companies can cluster, support growth with each other, and then help support the growth of businesses in the area as well. So that was just a brief overview. As Rob mentioned, we're happy to follow up with any additional questions that anyone might have. But with that, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Gardner.
Thank you. Appreciate those comments from both of you. And through Mayor O'Brien, my suggestion would be to move to Mr. Bass from EKN, and he has some other items to share from their perspective, but I leave it to your direction, of course.
Yeah, that's fine, Director Gardner. Let's go with that.
Great. And I see Mr. Bass is here.
Mr. Bass is on there. Very good. If you can unmute yourself, Mr. Bass.
Good morning, Madam Mayor, Mr. Vice Mayor, and members of the City Council and the Planning Commission. Kevin, could I share my screen? I think I do have power.
Yes, let us.
No, it says it's disabled.
Yeah, we'll, let's see, you will become a co-host, which will allow you to, there you go. It should work now.
There we go. Okay, I just have one slide just to walk through, and some of the points that I want to address in my brief talk, are pretty much similar to what Mr. Domenico was discussing, but I thought I'd walk through them. Can everyone see my screen? It seems like it's working hard to try to share.
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah. Okay. Just trying to go into a slideshow format. There we go. So first of all, I wanted to really break my quick comments into two parts. One is to talk about sort of hotel development versus other real estate development, particularly life sciences. And the other is to talk about FAR and why an increased FAR has a lot of benefits for us as a developer and also for the city. We've been out in Burlingame now for about 5 years. We control the site at 1499 Old Bay Shore. And we have gone through the entitlement process, a fairly protracted process as would be expected given the location, addressing FAA issues, addressing bay issues, et cetera, to get a hotel entitled for the site. 400-room hotel, dual branded project. Kevin put that on the screen earlier, the rendering of that project. We've been in the last year or so facing, obviously, as we all know, a very tough hotel market with COVID. Really a historic event in terms of a drop or decline in hotel performance. The drop off in visitation to the area impacts the San Francisco tourism market, impacts broadly to the local and regional economy. And so a very severe impact on the hotel marketplace, which is really national and international. As a result of that, it's become very difficult in this market environment because of the risks associated with hotel development investment to find debt, to secure strong equity. The market really has changed significantly. And in the very near term, there doesn't appear to be much remedy to that. The prevailing market dynamics really are fraught with risk from a hotel developer's perspective. We just opened a hotel recently in Rochester, Minnesota, 178-room Hyatt House, and it is limping along here at opening. And it's a challenging market. Do we expect that to change? Yes. We understand the value of transient occupancy taxes to the city. We would very much like to be developing and opening a hotel at this location, but at the moment and into the foreseeable future, the next few years at least, we don't expect there to be a robust market for us specifically and most importantly, to get the debt that we require in place in order to economically build the hotel. So we pivoted to look at life sciences as a viable development opportunity for the site. But in order to do that, obviously we need a much larger FAR for that to become economical. The value of building biosciences at that location is diversification of the economy. Commercial development drives hotel demand, so transient occupancy taxes can go up. Business development drives more business development. All of those things are going to contribute significantly to the local area economy, despite the fact that right now the hotel market is not strong. In the long run, it will recover. We expect it to, but where there is business development and diversified economies, that's where hotel products have done better. Even South San Francisco, just to the north, the hotel product has done better during this period than the products closer to the airport because of the concentration of life sciences development. Even in Rochester, Minnesota, where we have hotels, as much as it's been a struggling market because of the Mayo Clinic's presence and size of the Mayo Clinic, the hotels there have done relatively better, the existing open hotels relatively better than other area markets. So the idea of diversifying the Burlingame economy to other uses, other commercial developments, not just focused on hotel development, to encourage those other commercial developments, could have long-term positive impacts to the local economy, including transient occupancy taxes. As far as the FAR itself, I know Kevin went through extensively, what's a 2, what's a 2.5, what's a 3, et cetera. For us as developers, the ability to go bigger in the case of any development, where the demand is there for that size of development, gives us the economies of scale. In other words, decreasing costs per square foot of additional construction size or development size to produce a better product. It allows us to have more or better positive economics of the project, which means we can do a nicer building. We can do more public benefits on the site, et cetera. So economies of scale really benefit us as the developer, but also the local community, because you get a more beautiful product architecturally, and the economics are there to support additional benefits to the community. There's also scale congruity in providing a 2.5 to 3 FAR on the site. Right now we're right near the Hyatt Regency as an example. If we were to build a very small, 0.75 FAR building on our site, it would not be congruent in size and scale to other buildings, particularly hotel buildings along that portion of Bayshore Avenue. So just from a visual perspective, from a skyline perspective, this disparity in FARs can create a range of development patterns that will be incongruent in terms of scale and visual experience. But we think that will be a positive benefit as well for the city. And then also importantly is that by going bigger, going to a larger FAR, we not only get economies of scale and greater economic benefits locally, more jobs, et cetera, as Mr. McKennis commented on, but we also have the opportunity to generate more property taxes as an important revenue stream for the city. The bigger we go, pushing up to an FAR 3, which is our preference, because the demand for that size office and laboratory facility is there, gets us to property taxes that are sizably larger than at a lower FAR. And it also incentivizes us to be able to do this project. In the near term, we are looking at a market where hotel development is not attractive for our investors, not attractive for equity, not attractive for debt, and very risky. In the long run, hotel development will come back in the market, and we'll probably be there looking to do a hotel, in all honesty. But right now, we need to pivot to a life sciences project, and we need a scale of that project to make it economic and to make it make sense for us to move forward and bring the benefits associated with that project to the city. So those are my comments. Happy to discuss or answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bass. All right, I'm going to go back to my colleagues. And do any of my colleagues have questions to Director Gardner or our presenters? Vice Chair Terrace.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a quick question. Kevin, in reading the staff report, I know that you folks have thought about the link between this change and a potential change and the general plan and the environmental impact report that was done. And there's a comment in the staff report that says, as projects are proposed, the total build out will need to continue to be monitored to ensure that new development is within the parameters evaluated in the AIR, et cetera. Am I reading that to say that, we may allow some change, or we may craft the ordinances to allow for a greater FAR, but that may mean that at some point there may need to be some moratorium on the build out, perhaps, or something of that sort, similar like we've done with other uses, or is that what you're contemplating?
Yeah, so we kind of keep in the background a track of development, and this is citywide, and in a second I'll mention how an example from downtown, but yeah, we want to make sure that the development is within the threshold of what was studied. Now, it doesn't mean it's a moratorium when you reach the limit. It just means that any future projects will have to do an additional environmental review because they were not studied as part of that initial study. So, for example, in downtown, the downtown specific plan had a certain assumption of office development, which has now been reached. And that doesn't mean we can't have more office buildings in downtown, but it does mean the kind of environmental review that would occur is different. We can't necessarily do what was the last project that was approved was a community plan exemption where you say you're basically conforming to the plan. Now, if the plan is full, so to speak, you need to either do an initial study neg deck or an EIR for the project itself. So that's something we just track. The other option, when you reach full, so to speak, you can do an addendum to the general plan EIR and say, okay, well, now we're reaching a place where we need to recalibrate, and then you can change your assumptions, redo your traffic model, and kind of reset at that point. So you just want to be cognizant that as you reach those points that you're kind of covering yourself environmentally and then taking the next steps should you need more studies.
Okay, so in regards to this question, remind me, we're at a point where you've begun the draft of the updated ordinances for this area. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and those haven't come before us or haven't been presented yet, have they?
Not yet. They will very soon. We have draft chapters, and so one of the questions that we're looking at as part of this conversation is, right now it still says 0.75 within the draft code. Should there be direction to change that number, we will put that in the draft code, and it means we can still keep looking at that number, but we are at this place trying to figure out what number should we be putting in that draft. The draft will come to the Planning Commission. Spoiler alert, on Monday night, we'll be discussing with you the schedule for the zoning ordinance review.
I saw that, yeah.
So we will be talking about that, but we're ready to get started, and this may be an example of a chapter we pull forward sooner than later because it's very timely, and whereas other chapters, maybe you can wait, there's not so many changes.
Okay, so my last question, which is kind of a comment, but I'll form it in a question. Couldn't we, as part of the updated ordinance then, if we were to allow for increases to the FAR, we could also allow for increases in height, point being that would allow us to somewhat limit lot coverage to require activated streets, like we've talked about, like with the hotel project that came before us and other developments that have come before us in the Bay Shore, where even though there may not be a neighborhood now, we're looking to get activated streets. So, there eventually may be some neighborhoods over there and offices of life science and other types of office. And so I think it'd be unfortunate if we lost the opportunity to create, even if it's a collective campus type feel of neighborhoods, even if it might not be one property or one campus, but it could be, like I say, a collective a group of campus or properties that form sort of a campus feel, if there is a little bit more open space. So I think it'd be unfortunate if we allowed for build out of the lots. So it may mean somehow restricting lot coverage somehow. I know that's a little bit contrary to the need for greater, larger floor plates. But I just think that there should be a balance between what we allow for this build out, because to cut to the chase, I would be supportive of these types of uses if we can craft the ordinance to do so. But I think we just need to consider the forms of what that development becomes as we develop the ordinances.
Sure.
Thank you.
I'll just mention that, yeah, floor area ratio is one of the controls. Lot coverage is another. Height is the third. 2 out of 3 kind of cover things. They tend to duplicate each other. So if the concerns are floor area and lot coverage, then that'll have a result on the height, but you don't necessarily have to have that height standard or whichever criteria. So if it seems lot coverage is something that's important, then that can be something we look at along with floor area ratio.
Yeah, like we've often talked about, I think it's possible to create active street frontages even with taller buildings. So anyway, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Chair Say.
Thank you. So I understand we're not making any decision here today, but talking about the FAR going potentially to a 3.0 for life science industry, would the light industrial or the innovative industrial FAR remain the 0.75?
That's what has been proposed, if you call it a proposal. The only area that we're really looking at increasing the floor area would be those properties fronting Bayshore Highway, and it would be for offices and life science and whichever categories we use in the land use. I don't think we would propose a 3.0 for a purely industrial use. So it would be pretty limited just to these particular uses in that particular location. We've also not, the proposal has not been to extend the increased FAR beyond these properties fronting Bayshore Highway. We have had inquiries where people have said, I want to go all the way to Highway 101 with higher FAR. That would be something quite different. And then I think that's starting to get away from the general plan more. So it's been a pretty focused just on the properties fronting Bayshore Highway. And then we would include both general office and life science, just because they're kind of interchangeable. As we've heard, the life science uses do have some different characteristics, but in terms of the buildings, we would most likely apply it to both of those types.
Okay, so then on that note, so Jason mentioned about scale congruity and relationship to hotels. Would there be concerns or things we would need to discuss or consider about these 0.75 FAR industrial buildings in the area in that same aspect?
That is an interesting point, and I think that is something, as the Planning Commission and City Council can look at as you look at the zoning. It is 2 different types of development, and the hotels do tend to be bigger, and that's kind of what they exist now and what the future ones will most likely be. Whereas we do have this 0.75 FAR for the industrial and as it is right now, the labs in the current zoning. So it is kind of a contrast. I know one of the applicants had asked about, how do you step down if maybe you've got more mass at the street and then it's, you're coming down to the lower densities in the more industrial side of things. So I think those are all things that the commission and the council can look at as we look at the zoning standards.
Okay, thank you. And then I just have one more question. Other than mechanical penthouse and kind of the desire for taller ceiling heights and kind of bigger floor plans, there's manufacturing protocols that I believe are called Current Good Manufacturing Practices, CGMPs. Do those have any effect on the massing of life science buildings?
They may. We may want to hear from one of our, I'm seeing Mike is shaking his head. We do know, that some of them have told us there may be either loading docks, access yards, things like that you wouldn't necessarily see in general office building that you would see on these types of buildings. And if Mr. Domenico wants to add more to that, please.
Sure, I can answer that. In these types of buildings that we're discussing, there may be small pilot scale manufacturing facilities, a very, very small portion of the building, but typically those type of facilities want to be a standalone single story building because they require very high floor to floor heights. They, instead of needing a 15-foot floor to floor height, it would want to be something like 23 feet clear. So those are your typical single story manufacturing buildings. Those definitely want to be all one story because people don't want to be moving materials up and down multiple floors. So those would want to be single story buildings.
Interesting. Thank you.
Let's go with Councilmember Brownrigg, followed by Commissioner Schmidt.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I do have a couple of comments I want to make, but this is just a question, a quick one. And that is, do life sciences generate sales tax? And maybe the fact that the manufacturing happens somewhere else, the answer will be no. But just as a matter of fact, do life sciences generate sales tax?
I do not know. I will have to phone a friend in either a finance department or we do know there have been some sales taxes related to construction and the fittings.
I'm
not talking about the construction. I mean the business. And I'm happy to go to the experts.
Do either of the presenters know that answer?
Yeah, I don't necessarily think so. I would defer to the other presenters, but certainly in terms of bringing people into the area who are going to spend dollars. So indirectly, yes, but through the business of the life sciences facility itself, I don't believe so, but I would defer to Mr. Domenico and Mr. Albright on that.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think generally, it's research and development more than production. But we can look into it ourselves. I think a GMP manufacturing facility would be a little different than a typical research and development, but we can research it on ourselves as well.
Thank you. And I'll reserve my comments for the end.
Very good, thank you. Commissioner Schmidt, followed by Vice Mayor Ortiz.
Sorry about that. Commissioner Gardner, or Director Gardner rather, given that strip of land that we're talking about, at what point do we already kind of hit the limits of that EIR? If we build 3 of these buildings in that entire strip, do we already then hit the max? Because that kind of starts to come back into how deep do we go off of Bayshore? Because what if one of these developers says, well, it's not just the parcel that goes out to Bayshore, but I want to buy 3 parcels in so that I can get a large enough land for these larger floor plates. And so I wouldn't want to just say, well, only the parcel that today is on there, but how do we write this in a way that allows for that flexibility?
So a couple of things, and it really is, it's the, ultimately the direction of the commission and the council, if they were to want to, how broadly to apply any kind of increase. I think within the strip that we're looking at, if it's 3, 4, even 5 projects, it's probably still within what the general plan had looked at in terms of the whole bayfront. It's a, the bayfront is huge, so it would be a fairly small change. I would, it's again, it's up to the council and the commission, but I would hesitate to suggest allowing the increase to go very far into the innovation industrial area, only because we do want to retain sites for industrial and service uses. We're near the airport and we do need to have somewhere. When FAR increases, you do start to see things changing and we would probably have a harder time retaining the industrial uses. So, and this is something we've, talked to the applicants too and said, just really focus on the properties surrounding Bayshore. We have a history of treating those a little differently, but we want to kind of protect our industrial reserve further back.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
Just my question is, going back to Vice Chair Terronez's comments on height, what are the restrictions due to the proximity to the airport? So how high can we go?
So, and
165 feet.
yeah, and thank you for that clarification. I know one of, after the staff report came out, I did get a comment from one of the other parties that it does vary. So generally 165 above sea level or 150 above grade is kind of in most cases, but it is, FAA has their way of setting heights that I don't entirely understand. There are instances where it could be higher in some locations, lower in others. So it's all based on their kind of assessment and the flight patterns. But we, as a rule of thumb, we say, 150 above grade applies pretty much in most places. And then the other point, just as a clarification, it is not within an airport safety zone. So that is something that is good to know in terms of we have other parts of the Rollins Road and North Burlingame areas that are within those safety zones where the heights would be more constrained and the uses. So just by luck of geography, it's here the heights can be fairly high and it's not within one of those turning safety zones.
Thank you, Director Gardner. I am going to now open up, because I'm looking at the time and we've hit 11 o'clock. So let me open up public comment and see who would like to comment at this time. So let's start with Jennifer Pfaff, followed by Kirksheim.
Hi there. I just want to toggle a little bit off of Commissioner Terronez's comments, kind of go a little bit further. There was a mention as they get the floor-area ratio increases that there are opportunities for community benefits. And I wanted to just say that if we go that direction, I think it would be better in advance to decide what we want to do, because so many times projects have come forward where they sort of throw in the community benefit as sort of a checklist, but it's not really something that a want, it's sort of a leftover. And considering the location, the wind, the direction of the way the shadows work, I think it would behoove the planning commission or whatever body to look at what do we want, kind of the way we're doing that new industrial area. Where would we want there to be community benefits, so that when these big projects come along, we can say, yeah, but you can do this, but this is part of this larger thing, almost like Bay Trail, but you get the idea, so that it's not a leftover. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Is Kirk on the line? You want to unmute yourself, please?
Okay, great.
There you go.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, yeah, Kirksheim, Woodstock Development, great overviews, I think, by Kevin Gardner and by Mike. So we, just so everybody knows, we own 1350 Bayshore. It's a 200,000 square foot office building on about 5 acres across from the Hyatt Regency. We're working on a plan for additional development around our building, and in particular for the life science industry. We've been developing office life science buildings for the life science industry on the peninsula for over 30 years. And one of the things that we found a really consistent theme for life science users is that they like to congregate or cluster. We've seen that in Mission Bay in San Francisco, South San Francisco, Brisbane, Foster City, Stanford Research Park, Menlo Park, and more recently a growing cluster in San Carlos. So we really love the idea of more life science zoning, more life science buildings along this corridor. We think it'd be good for everybody and for the life science development thesis. That's all I have today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Simon. All right, I have the 957-551. I think that's Jeff. Can you unmute yourself? If you can't unmute yourself, maybe you can go through the chat. So in the meantime, while you're doing that, we did have a chat question from Ray Larios. Does a life science building with a higher FAR produce higher amounts of hazardous materials? If so, will occupancy standards and fire protection upgrades be required? And maybe Director Gardner, would you have an answer for that?
Yeah, so there's really not a direct relationship between the floor area and whether there's hazardous materials or not. It's really the type of lab work that's being done. But regarding hazardous materials, there's state level building code and fire code requirements that everybody follows. There's also state and national requirements. This was something I've discussed with some of the applicants as well. And the good news for cities is they don't have to be the ones to figure that out. There are well accepted standards that are applied statewide and nationwide and such, as well as with the county. So the hazardous materials are covered that way. But again, yeah, it's not really a function of the floor area as much as the type of research that's going on.
Great, thank you, Director Gardner. Okay, I think we have 957-551 was unmuted. Now it's me. Now you're muted again. You want to try one more time? Okay, I am going to go back to my colleagues. If you can maybe put your comment through chat, then I can read it out loud. All right, so back to my colleagues. I do have a question for Director Gardner. So if you were kind of going to, and you may not know the answer to this question, maybe when the presenters do, but if you were going to look across the spectrum of life science buildings, do they go to that 3.0, or is there really a lower range that would be an average?
So in reviewing, we have met with quite a few parties, and the staff report kind of hints at this. For most of what we've heard, 2.5 is kind of the sweet spot, so to speak, in terms of that's kind of what you can fit on the site and what works out economically or in terms of what is being proposed. There have been some applicants, as we've heard, that can see going all the way to 3.0. But I think in terms of the conversations we've had, without giving away anybody's secrets or what have you, is that 2.5, 2.4, 2.5 seems to be something workable for most of the projects we've looked at.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Director Gardner. It's good to know. All right, so we are going to go, I'm going to start with Councilmember Coulson, followed by Councilmember Brownrigg, then Vice Mayor Ortiz and Councilmember Beach. Let's try to keep these comments short and not elaborate too much, considering we are already over time.
Thank you. So my original comment, or my comment, just pertains back to Jennifer Pfaff around the public benefit. And I just want to make sure that colleagues are aware that Len Matterman, who, as you all know, is the CEO for the Flood and Sea Level Rise Resiliency District, of which I am one of the members, did come out and meet with several of the potential developers and discuss the sea level rise protection work that we would potentially do. If you recall, this is Reach 1 and Reach 2 for the city of Burlingame. And these two reaches have been our priority. They've been designated as priority with help from the staff due to the likelihood of more intense flooding in the near term. So I believe that as we discuss these prescribed public benefits, one important element will be elements of paying for sea level rise protection for their own building and then for the innovation industrial area as well. And we may also want to think about how we're going to share that cost amongst the innovation industrial building area as well. They're not right on the bayfront, but they would certainly be benefiting from any of the upgrades that we developed. And so rather than each individual developer saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to build a seawall, or I'm going to put a marsh, whatever they're going to do, I think it's really important that we mandate these be developed in conjunction with our staff and with the flood and sea level district, and that the benefit monies really are going to need to go into that work. So that's going to be a very high priority for public benefit. And if we can create a prescribed, like, this is what we need on this section and this section and this section, then I think we will come up with a cohesive plan, and that the benefits from an increased FAR and the economic benefits will then revert from the city right into those improvements. And it will save the taxpayers a lot of money, and it will be a sort of a link that has a nexus to it, and will be a holistic plan. So Len really was emphasizing that, and I am carrying that message to colleagues. And that's it. The only other comment he had, which was to think about east-west, if you will, call it. So we're doing the good transit along the coast, but how do we get people from either North Rollins Road area over to the other side to enjoy these beautiful bay trails in ways that are more like pedestrian bridge or et cetera. So those were the comments I wanted to share that he had.
Thank you, Councilmember Coulson. I do want to add one real quick comment too, is that, if we're looking at this futuristically and there are multiple campuses that may be developed, it may be essential for us to really look at how transportation works for, let's say, shuttles between these campuses and bringing them to our downtown areas. Because we do, if we're going to be having, more people coming into our area, we really want them to be able to know where our downtown areas are and shop and eat and so forth. And if you have that public transportation shuttles, or one shuttle that maybe these campuses, buy into and they all share, that could be something that would be beneficial, to that area, because I'm sure, people will be concerned about traffic, even though it is in a very good spot for public transportation to be utilized. All right, on that note, let's go with Councilmember Brownrigg, followed by Vice Mayor Ortiz.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I'll try to be quick, but I do have a couple of things I want to get across. One, I stand in support of the change to 3.0 to make it to harmonize it with across the street. I'm not worried about height. I think I would rely on the commission to find the right balance, but I wouldn't let height concerns be at all about a boundary because that area can easily handle whatever height we decide to put on it. I do like life sciences from a diversification point of view for the city, as well as the fact that it's less intense from a worker point of view. So the sort of work-house imbalance that we talk about often is less exacerbated by life sciences. So, and then finally, I would ask all the planning commissioners to always make sure we use bird-safe glass on all the big buildings over there. But I do want to take a step back. And the reason that I do care about making sure we protect hotels, which is something councils did back in the 70s when the developers first had ANZA and didn't want to do hotels, and they insisted on it. It is an incredibly robust source of income for us. So I'll just share some math. If the building, to use Mr. Bass's observation, is roughly worth $400 million when it's built, that's $4 million in property tax. So That's good for K-14 schools. So kindergarten through community college get $2 million a year from that. Thank you. That's good. The city gets about $650,000 to $700,000 a year from it. From the hotel building that will now not be built, 400 hotel rooms generate $3.2 million a year for the city. So that's a step down, not counting the property tax from that building, a step down from 3.2 million to 700,000. And that's why hotels matter for our city. And I therefore support this change, but I also support whatever we can do to continue to create incentives for hotel development. So I'm not sure what that is for Director Gardner or for our city, but we will not do future generations any service by encouraging hotels to switch into other uses. And so I just want to share that that perspective. Thank you very much.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. He took this wind out of my sails, but that's exactly kind of what I was going to point to. The current situation makes it difficult to finance hotels. That will change. They will come back, and those crazy bankers will eventually want to make loans to hotels. And so I think that when we do this and we look at our change, a permanent change based on our current financing situation, we have to be careful, and we really can't forget what Michael just said, which is that our hotels are extremely important for our budget. So what we had talked about is doing a different FAR for hotels than for life sciences. And I think we had talked about 2.75 and leaving the hotels at 3.0. And I would be in favor of that, to just kind of, remind us that hotels are our preference in that area.
Councilmember Beach.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll try not to repeat other things colleagues have already said. I want to appreciate the dialogue and the questions, particularly the planning commissioners brought up, which came up at our meeting as well. I asked a similar question about, look, if we say yes to this increased FAR for life sciences, what does that do to our general plan? What does that do to our jobs, housing, and balance? And for now, it repositions where the jobs would be, but we have to go in with our eyes wide open about if there's increased development, that there may be asks for increased life sciences down the future. So I hope that we'll really explore that. Generally, I'm supportive of life sciences for all the reasons Councilmember Brownrigg stated. I think there's three things that I'm particularly concerned with. One is making sure we're getting the transportation policy right. Number two, that we're maximizing in an appropriate, fair way community benefits. And then number three, making sure the increased FAR fits within our bayfront. So I'll just talk a couple quick things. First, on the transportation policy, we have to learn from other cities, particularly South San Francisco, which is a hub of biotech right now. And they've done a lot of studies about traffic and transportation and lessons learned. I just looked up some things this morning before the meeting, but they've got a 67% drive alone rate in their South San Francisco industry out there, and it's a real problem for them. So they've had a full study that went in 2019, 2020 of how they're trying to fix that. 70% of the folks that work in South San Francisco in that biotech area live along the Caltrain corridor. So they live in San Mateo, Santa Clara, and San Francisco counties. So there's an opportunity there, but we have to make the policy decisions that create the right kinds of transportation choices for folks who come out. And we have a great opportunity with particularly Broadway Station being right there, and then of course Millbrae Station. So I think as far as the transportation policy, there's two things. There's what developers do and then what tenants do when they actually come in. So I hope that we can work with developers. I think they've built a good case for parking ratios, maybe a little bit different for life sciences because they're using somewhere 50% of their space not for office people. But we have to get the parking ratios right. So if there's savings there as far as parking, and we have to be aware that we might not need as much parking for these, how can we get community benefits out of those savings? How also, as far as infrastructure with developers, the future of transportation is going to be building up public transit and then having last mile solutions to these job centers. So having drop zones wherever we are, really focusing on where shuttles can drop. And then eventually it's going to be autonomous vehicles that are doing that as well. So hopefully we can think about the infrastructure. As far as community benefits, I echo everything that Councilmember Colson said and that other folks are mentioning. Even one of our public commenters, Ms. Pfaff, talked about, let's decide what we want before these projects start getting in the pipeline. Things that are high on my level of priority would be childcare facilities somehow incorporated, because when people don't have to travel to bring their kids different places, that can reduce traffic transportation. Also, we've got a big project with Broadway grade separation that is not fully funded. So there's a direct nexus to increased value of having additional office space or biotech, helping to pay to get that Broadway train station to make sure we actually have a train stop. And it's going to cost a lot of money to get Broadway's grade separation done and the train station built. Bike ped investment and absolutely sea level rise, like Councilmember Colson brought up, investing in those priorities with a collaborative conversation about what's reasonable. What are those funding mechanisms? Are they impact fees? We appreciate that they'll be contributing to affordable housing by nature of our current policies, but we also need to invest in the transportation and the sea level rise and the quality of life solutions there. And then finally, as far as fit, really appreciate the expertise and the thoughts that were brought out today. There's been some conversation about heights with FAR. I would just caution everybody to think a little bit about how would an increased FAR fit with the lower industrial zone, so we don't have a wall and we have like an integrated something that makes sense. Planning Commission can figure that out better than someone like me, but that we're thoughtful about that. I also thought Commissioner Terrace's comment about making sure that we leave space for active space is important for the future. So I don't know how we balance all that, but hopefully that we're thinking about the blend and the long-term best interest. I think we kept a light industrial zone because we value it. We value those kind of jobs. We value a place in our city for it, but how do we blend it with increased FAR? Those are my comments. Thanks so much. And I look forward to, the one other thing is, the transportation management is going to be.
Councilmember, can you wrap this up? Because there are other
Sure
people.
thing, I just did. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Commissioner Camerado, followed by Commissioner Loftus and Commissioner Schmidt. Can we please make these comments a little on the shorter side because we're going almost a half hour over?
Hi, everyone. So I agree with Councilmember Colson. I think the biggest issue that I have is when we're talking about the Bayside and keeping open space, not only do we have to, the same suggestion as Jennifer Pfaff has said, but we have to take into consideration BCDC and the Army Corps of Engineers and that Bayside riprap that we have, and how are they going to be, they may influence what we can do on that on that side where for sea level rise. So what I would ask is that maybe if we're starting to talk to these developers, that they also start talking to BCDC sooner than later and try to get a plan for that Bayside sea level rise wall that we need to take into consideration.
Thank you, Commissioner Camerado. Commissioner Loftus, followed by Commissioner Schmidt.
Yeah, I just wanted to we don't have a project in front of us, which is where I'm always most comfortable. I do want to stick to the architecture, urban design side, though that's my knitting. With regard to urban form, we've already decided that Old Bayshore will support a 3.0, some combination of 3.0. So this is a decision that is really about diversifying the local economy, which is, I think, a really good thing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Commissioner Loftus. Commissioner Schmidt.
Yes, on that same note, I appreciate the conversation where a hotel generates a lot more tax revenue directly. Totally get it. I also, though, see that by adding diversification of jobs, it'll actually help energize hotels to come back. I mean, if you do look at South San Francisco over the last 20 years, the change into how dense of a biosciences area that has become, look at all the hotels and other businesses that have had, come in to support all of that there, because it was desolate not that long ago. So I think that this is a good diversification for us, and I think that area can handle it. I agree with some of the comments about the community benefits and not just putting in leftover space. I think we do see that lately on a lot of our projects, particularly the multifamily housing, where we're just putting a little plaza. I think we do need to be more cohesive in our thought, and maybe it has more to do with setbacks off of Bay Shore so that we do get that more open, energized space and not just building a 10-story building right on the property line and on the sidewalk. So I think that there's some really great opportunities there for guidance so that these projects don't get slammed after the fact, and trying to help them understand our desires to make that happen in a great way. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Schmid. So before we conclude, I just want to add that I do agree we need to diversify in our Bayfront area. We have relied on the hotels for their TOT, and that has really kept Burlingame in regards to revenues up and running and giving us the opportunity to offer quality services. And so we do want to continue with that. But I think unfortunately, we're going through that lull with the hotels, but according to John Hutar, we should be in that recovery mode and hopefully recoup by 2024 to 2025. So I still think hotels should be a top priority, as Councilmember Brownrigg has mentioned. However, we do have an opportunity to diversify ourselves. And it's one of the things, you can't rely on just hotels. And so the more we can diversify and utilize that opportunity, I think that becomes a benefit for the city of Burlingame. And I just want to comment that it is important that we incorporate these community benefits. I actually did talk to one of the presenters yesterday in regards to childcare facilities. And we also talked about additional shuttle service, in that area. So I do think this is kind of an exciting time for us to really keep an open mind and looking at life science and kind of figuring out how that fits into our general plan. It sounds like we have definitely wiggle room to add these projects in the Bayfront area. So I look at this as an exciting opportunity. And of course, we'll get into those, details that council members and planning commissioners brought up today. I do see our interim city attorney on the call. Is there anything you wanted to add? Because I just saw you pop up.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to want to make sure that since there could be people who have state issues, that we do read out the comments. So if Councilmember Brownrigg doesn't mind, either I can read your comment really quickly, or if you'd like to, Councilmember Brownrigg, I just want to make sure that those who have state issues are able to understand everything.
I didn't understand everything you said. You're very hard to hear.
I am very sorry. Can you hear me better now?
A little bit better.
Yes. Well, since I'm not having the best technical issue here, Councilmember Brownrigg, can you please read your chat for those who might be sight impaired?
I apologize. The chats are being saved, so I added some additional comments for the record. I apologize, Madam Mayor. I had no intention of speaking. Are you saying I have to do this, Mr. City Attorney?
I think it's a better practice for those who might not be able to read this.
All right, I apologize. I won't do that again.
Yeah, that was next on my list, actually, to go back to the chat before we close this forum and we move forward to the next item. So Councilmember Brownrigg, since it is from you, do you want to read it out loud?
I will, and I apologize, Madam Mayor, I didn't intend this, but I wrote, since chat is being saved, I want to endorse Councilwoman Colson's points of using impact or development fees to supplement the Bayside budget that we need to aggregate for sea level rise defense, and also endorse Councilwoman Beach's comments on childcare and new developments. In terms of stepping down the design to the Innovation District, I don't worry about this. It's not like a residential step down to me. People don't live there. The Innovation District will change in the future, and I don't worry about the current transition phase. If Bayshore buildings are very tall, an Innovation District is not. That's my point of view. So that's what I wrote.
Very good. Thank you, Councilmember Brownrigg. And before I close this, I did notice that Mr. Bass had his hands raised, had his hand raised. So I apologize for not calling on you. Did you want to add anything, Mr. Bass, before we close?
Can I talk?
Yes.
Oh, I am. Okay. I don't fully understand this. Yeah, I had just really wanted to very quickly piggyback off the comments about the TOT. I've been working in hotel development for about 25 years now, and I've seen ups and downs. And the important thing to consider is that the market is what incentivizes hotel development. When the market is good, hotels are developed. When it's not good for hotels, they aren't developed. And so you're just going through a normal cycle of that. And at the end of the day, hotel investment, when it works, is the highest yielding of all the asset classes of development investing, even relative to life sciences. So the incentive is there. You just need the market environment, which will come back in the next few years. We're just faced with the current environment where, the market is demanding life sciences and other types of development, and to allow those developments to be developed the way they need to be developed to make them economic for the developer as well as for the community. So I just wanted to add that.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Bass. All right. That concludes our second item. So a question I want to just throw out there. Do people want a 5-minute break before we go into item 3, or do you prefer to go right into item 3?
Straight into item 3.
Okay, very good. I will go with the chair, the Planning Commission on that. So Director Gardner, would you like to go over the staff report in regards to changes to the design review projects during construction? This seems to be an issue this last couple years of items coming to as an FYI to the Planning Commission, and there may be issues that maybe should have been solved at an earlier time period rather than an FYI item that puts kind of the Planning Commission at an awkward position.
Yes, thank you, Mayor O'Brien, and I would like to hand this over to Planning Manager Ruben Hurin, who has prepared this item and will give a staff presentation.
Very good, thank you.
Great, thank you, Madam Mayor, council members and commissioners. I will, given that we only have about half an hour, I want to be respectful of everyone's time, so I will pare down my staff report some. In the past year, there have been an increasing number of design review projects returning to the Planning Commission, requesting approval of significant as-built changes to projects. When the project is brought forward to the Commission for review of these requested changes, the Commission is then placed in an uncomfortable and difficult position, and many times to either deny the request because the as-built changes don't reflect the originally approved project, or require that certain architectural and or exterior elements be altered in order for the project to be consistent with the approved project. It appears that in most recent projects, these involve contractors or property owners with little or no experience building in Burlingame, so they may have been unaware of the design review process that helped shape the project. The purpose of this agenda item this morning is to discuss the proposed measures and procedures that would help prevent substantial changes being made to the design review projects during construction without the benefit of proper review by the Planning Commission. So I'm just going to share my screen here real quick and go over some of those points. So these design measures have been discussed recently by commissioners, council members, and staff. And these are just suggestions, so we welcome any other added procedures after your discussion this morning. So the first would be require an initial meeting with the project planner, the contractor, and property owner at issuance of a building permit. This would give us a chance to go over the conditions of approval and just to make sure that the contractor knows to install or to build the project as it was approved, and to let them know what the procedure is for requesting changes prior to them making the changes in the field. We could also require materials board be submitted. Currently, we only require materials boards for large major projects, but it's something that we can consider for single family homes And this might give the property owner or contractor a little bit more focus on the materials, and it'll keep it in the back of their minds as far as the types of materials being approved with the project. The planning staff could also conduct inspections during construction. So currently planning staff only goes out to the site at the end of construction. Perhaps staff could go out at framing, for example, to make sure that the envelope is built correctly, that the window openings are in the correct locations. And possibly at that time, we could also discuss and go over the architectural details of the project with the contractor. We could require the contractor to submit photographs to document that the architectural details are being built according to plan. Lastly, we could also require that the contractor post a construction bond to ensure that the project is being built according to plan. So those are some of the suggestions that we had, but we certainly welcome any suggestions from council members and commissioners after your discussion this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Planning Manager Hurin. I appreciate that overview. Actually, it's covered quite a few things that I have brought up with the Planning Department and our City Manager this past year. So I appreciate you incorporating some of those suggestions. So I am going to start out with questions from my colleagues. I will focus more on the Planning Commissioners first, and then my City Council members, since this is in their ballpark. Okay, Vice Chair Terrace, followed by Commissioner Camarado.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't really have questions. I just have comments, so I can hold those and wait until questions are done.
Yeah, let's hold comments for right now because I want to make sure I get to the public, but I appreciate that, Vice Chair Terrace. Commissioner Camarado?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor O'Brien. Ruben, have you heard from contractors? And I know that it's not in our preview, but have you heard from these contractors that have been coming back what they would have liked? I mean, we know what we want, but what could we do to help them help us, right? So what have they said? Have they said anything? Is there something that keeps coming back to staff that could help facilitate this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't recall anything consistent coming back to staff. Over the years, the contractors who have built many projects in Burlingame, they've kind of adapted and they know, hey, check with planning staff. They want to make a change. And we really appreciate that. It's the first time contractors, the first time builders in Burlingame that really are unaware of the process that the project went through. And at the end of the project, they're a little surprised because in other cities that they've worked with, they can make those changes in the field. So I guess that's one thing that we've learned is let's try to proactively, prevent that from happening. And perhaps we can catch it either at the beginning, at the building permit stage, and or in the middle of construction before they've put on those exterior materials. But in terms of hearing from contractors, what they would like to have seen, we haven't really heard anything from them on that.
Thank you, Commissioner Camarado. Chair Say, please.
Thank you. For the planning staff, when architects, designers, contractors come back with revisions to an approved project, are those ordinarily processed kind of first come, first served and kind of mixed in with all the other applications that come through the planning department?
We would bring those projects forward as soon as the revised plans are submitted and are correct in terms of showing the as-built changes. So, we don't really bump them up to the front of the line, but we want to make sure that the plans are complete, number one. We do understand that they're at the final stages of construction and that the family is ready to move in. And unfortunately, that's the pressure that's placed on staff and commission as well. So again, part of this discussion is to try to prevent that from happening. But we want to make sure that the plans are complete in terms of showing as-built changes or what's out in the field. We don't always get that. Staff tries really hard to get those plans at that stage. But we can only do so much, and then we have to decide to take action on it.
Thank you.
Ruben, I have a quick question. Do you think part of this is due maybe sometimes with the applicant being kind of the homeowner when it's not spec, that they have kind of visions in their head and they're not really sure how that is intertwined with what our design review guidelines are?
Yes, I would definitely agree with that. Sometimes a homeowner sees, for example, a brick wainscoting at the base of the building, and they think they can change it to any type of material. And sometimes, we've seen recently some projects where they're coming up with interior tiles, tiles that are meant for the interior of a house being placed on the exterior. So we really want to be more specific with the contractors and property owners and say, hey, this type of stone was called out. You need to install this stone. If you don't want to install the stone, here's the process to ask to change it. But yeah, the homeowners, on these more difficult projects, we've learned that the homeowners are kind of guiding the contractors, and the contractors don't know how to handle that. So they just make the change in the field. And then unfortunately, we get into the situation we have at the end of a project.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Beach.
Thank you. I appreciate that staff is working hard with the Planning Commission to try to address these issues and come up with some, reasonable proposals. This is really informative. My question is, some of these proposals seem kind of staff intensive, and that seems to me it would translate into significantly higher, or I don't know, would it translate into higher fees because you can't just do things without recouping those costs? So if staff could kind of address what that might do to the cost structure. And then, for example, like number one, having an initial meeting with the project planner, the contractor, and the property owner at the issuance, that's pretty staff intensive. Was there any thought given to like what of a very colorful fluorescent piece of paper that they just need to sign off on it? That is very obvious. Like if you make a change, you need to get it approved. Like, was there some discussion, or is that maybe we already have that and that just hasn't been effective? Thanks for addressing those two questions.
Sure. Yeah, with regards to having them sign a form, we have thought about that as a consideration. Unfortunately, the contractors have so many forms to sign that they don't always read it carefully. So we're a little afraid of having them do that. We can certainly have them do that perhaps at the end of our conversation at that initial meeting and say, okay, you've acknowledged that we've gone over these items, they can sign it. But really, we think it might be more effective to really sit down and have everyone look at those plans and really specifically call out those details. It will take some more staff time, but the more we think about it is maybe a 20-minute or half an hour meeting at that initial stage could save hours of delay at the back end with staff, with commission, with the homeowner, with the contractor. So it could be some time well invested. In terms of the fees, we can certainly look into charging a fee for that extra inspection, or increasing our planning filing fees for design review projects. That's something that we could possibly do during the master fee schedule discussion. But I think perhaps any extra inspections that might be required, that might be a good extra fee to charge. That initial meeting probably is lumped in with our plan check review. I think we can probably incorporate it there. And again, that might only be a 20-minute to 30-minute meeting, but hopefully it can go a long way in the end.
Thanks for your comments.
Madam Mayor, you're on mute. Sorry.
Oh, you think I know this by now. Okay, sorry about that. I am going to open it up to public comment. Is there anyone in the public that would like to speak? Okay, I have Jennifer Pfaff. Please unmute yourself, Jennifer.
Sorry about that. My
There
screen.
you go.
My screen changed. Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Mayor O'Brien, for bringing this up. And I pay attention to enough planning commission meetings that I know it's a problem. And I think you give great credit to, there are contractors and builders who should know, they really should know this stuff, and they're doing it. And so I don't think it should just go on the newbies. It is the other ones too, some of them anyway. So I like all these ideas, and I just want to generally say, I think unless it costs money, it's not going to be effective. So whether it's costing money up front or costing money in the end with some, I don't know, bond or I don't know, what do you call a lien or something, I don't know if it's going to be meaningful, because these are really valuable projects that go for, they go for a lot of money. Unless it kind of cuts into that, it maybe seem harsh, but I think it happens enough that it would be worthwhile coming down a little harder on this as far as the money aspect goes. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank every single planning commissioner and planning staff. You go through all this stuff and spend a lot of time on it. And I understand how frustrating it must be to discover that these things are being ignored or somehow there's a deviation. So thanks.
Thank you, Jennifer. Is there anyone else from the public? All right. So I will flip back to my colleagues. I do agree with Jennifer Pfaff in regard to penalties, just because this is happening frequently. And this actually was something I did discuss with Director Gardner in regards to a construction bond. I think that since this is happening so frequently, we really need to put our foot down at this time. So I would be a big proponent of asking for some type of money up front, so that they know that we are serious about this. Now, I understand things do change in the field. And really, the message that we are trying to display here is, we know that may happen, but then you need to be upfront and you tell us, so we can figure it out. And so I do like the idea of having the initial meeting. And I think it's important for both the homeowner, in addition to the contractor, to be together in that meeting. So they are both hearing it at the same time, and it's a consistent message. I also like the idea of an additional inspection, because then, once you're out in that field, what's right and what's wrong at an earlier time period. And I agree with charging for that that extra inspection. I do agree with Planning Manager Hurin that it's worth having that 20 minutes or 30 minutes in the beginning of the process, because it will probably save you hours of staff time at the end and save money in the end for the city. So I am a strong proponent of that. We already do it for big projects. So these are just smaller projects, and it will just take less time, but the message will be consistent, and they cannot say later on, we didn't know about it. Because as you said, Ruben, there are many papers that you sign, and probably most of the time people are signing it and not actually reading it. So the verbal communication, I think, is essential. So those are my comments. I will move on to Vice Chair Terrace, followed by Chair Say, and then Commissioner Gall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So real quick, I think the issue is homeowners don't often know what they're looking at. So they look at drawings. If they look at drawings, they don't see there's a difference between the drawing and what they're selecting. Or when they're selecting materials and making choices or looking at what the contractor has built, they may not look at the drawings. But I don't think ignorance is an excuse. I think contractors often default to what they're used to doing, what they've done on past projects, or as Ruben has said, what they've done in other cities. or they simply do what they want and they beg forgiveness. So I believe very strongly in suggestions number 1 and number 3. I think in regards to suggestion number 1, meeting with the applicant and their contractor, I think we need to instill some caution, if not fear, at least some caution in particularly in the homeowner, because I think they should be responsible regardless of their ignorance, some caution over changes that are made and then coming back for as-built permission. And I think that there needs to be an associated price tag or a discussion of the potential price tag that could be a consequence for as-built changes that come after the fact. In regards to that, I think that as-built changes, if staff is not comfortable with approving those administratively, because there may be some as-built changes still that could be approved administratively, but if staff is not comfortable with as-built changes, they should not come back to the Planning Commission as FYIs. They should come back as amendments. And I think the amendments for as-built changes should include a $5,000 price. And then explaining that at the beginning of the project to the homeowner will cause them to understand that if they want to make changes, bring them back as changes before the fact, not as built, and you won't have that $5,000 price tag. It may sound punitive, but I think that's what's going to cause them to not bring back as built changes. I think the other suggestion, number 3, is important because we have some changes that occur. We're seeing one Monday night. Some changes that occur that are extensive framing changes to how a roof was built, a dormer was built, etc. And if those are caught during the framing period, it's a lot easier to make the correction than after finishes, windows are installed, everything is painted and done, and they're coming back at the tail end of a project when staff is visiting then. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Chair Say?
Yes, thank you very much. So I think that a lot of this, these kind of occurrences happen. The root issue is that there are so many inconsistencies from city to city for contractors who work, and they don't just work in Burlingame, they work in many cities around the Bay Area. And the thing that would be very important to do is to communicate, along with the punitive damages with money and bonds and such. I totally agree with that. But it all comes from just clear communication from the very beginning, whether it's an old contractor that's worked for many years here or new contractors that are new to the city. Like we have at the end of each approved item in the Planning Commission meetings, we have an appeal statement that we read. Maybe it would be beneficial to add an extra paragraph stipulating the importance of following the design that's been approved, the materials that have been noted, and making that public and clear to the applicant as well as the designer or the architect on the job. I feel if for item number 1, that another party to that initial meeting would be the architect or the designer as well. Sometimes the architect and designer are the ones who designed it, and they can help to communicate to the contractor during construction as well, the importance of maintaining those details and the design intent that was to be carried out throughout the course of the project. So I would include that party as part of the sign off. Another thing that I've seen work pretty effectively is at the building department. There are a lot of red stamps that go on top of the job set of drawings for fire sprinklers that are required and other things. Maybe a simple stamp added on from the planning department that again reminds or stipulates the adherence to the approved design that the contractors will need to adhere to. So, and is there anything else I wanted to say? I fully believe we need to do something that would streamline this. I think another thing that could be a hurdle is the process of thinking about submitting revisions, right? People will be concerned about holding back construction and delaying construction. And though I know the planning staff is extremely busy, I don't know if there's some way we could create a process that these types of changes could be in a separate timeline, separate from a typical submission that's coming through the planning department, just to give it a little bit more expediency getting through a process. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Say. Are you just to clarify, Chair Say, are you thinking that instead of going to Planning Commission, that we give a little bit more discretion with our building official and or our planner for some of these changes out in the field? So they can make those decisions at that time rather than going back to the process if they feel comfortable and it's minor enough?
Well, yeah, I agree with that. If it's minor enough, I don't want to put the pressure on the planning staff to determine whether it's, aesthetically something that they should be involved with. I was mainly trying to make comments on how we can improve the process and the communication, and just provide clarity and expectations for those involved.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Mayor, if I can also just quickly add to that is we do have some guidelines in terms of what can be approved administratively or what should be brought to the commission as an FYI or as an amendment. The Neighborhood Consistency Subcommittee meeting a few years ago gave us kind of those guidelines, and we revisit those every so often. But we do collaborate with staff in terms of the types of changes that we consider are improvements or not. Typically, the ones that are reaching the Planning Commission level are the ones that go beyond those guidelines. So we do work quite extensively with applicants before it gets to the commission.
Very good, thank you. All right, Commissioner Gall, followed by Commissioner Schmid, and then Commissioner Camerado.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that disturbs me the most about this is that we have seen contractors who work in the city a lot come back with some major changes, and that to me is just I can't stomach that. But I don't want to put an additional workload on the staff. So we were talking about going over all the details, but that's what we do at the Planning Commission meetings. We go over that with the applicant, and the owner is usually there or in on the Zoom call. So I have to believe they understand what we're talking about, and this isn't something foreign to them. And I just don't see where we're going to be able to do anything like Jennifer Pfaff said. I think what we need to do is hit it in the pocketbook. So I think that there should be a bond, not only for the contractor, but for the homeowner as well. Maybe not the architect, because a lot of times the architect steps away after the permit's been approved. So, but if the homeowner knows that they got money on the line, as well as the contractor, I think that, you're going to get their attention, unless, we want to go to public floggings at the new town square. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Commissioner Schmid.
Yes, I appreciate the comments of my other fellow commissioners, and I want to try and I think a lot of them are good points. I want to try and maybe go even a little further upstream. It seems to me a lot of times the ones that are kind of the worst at this are the ones that come back and say, I ran out of money, or they actually had an architect that wasn't very strong. And I think that we could benefit from a little bit more guidance when the architect and owner are first submitting to planning, where we are a bit more educational on what that expectation is. And I think that we do need to be asking for more materials and renderings for the Planning Commission review so that the owner knows what they're getting into. Some of these 2D elevations, they're weak, and they say stone, and they don't make a commitment to these things. And then later, or even siding, we've seen a huge thing in, one siding versus another, and it can be a $30,000 change for them. So I think we need to be more impactful early on, and so that the owners know what they're getting into, because I think some of them are not setting aside enough money to get through these projects, and then they're cutting corners later and putting their contractors in that position to do it. So I think it's not only really contractors not following through, but I think it's not, a lack of education at the beginning with the architect and the owner and what they're getting into, because this is, it is expensive here. And so I think that we could be asking for more things at our action item or action part of our approval, where they are providing that materials board, providing more renderings based upon the feedback that they got at the study session. And there could be a more difference of what a study session submittal is and an action item submittal is. This shouldn't just be a rubber stamp of what you did in the study session. It really should be more so that you know that you have clarity on the project. And when you then go and invest in those construction documents and hiring a contractor, that you're going to actually get what you want and have the money to do it. So I would, I think more upfront could save a lot more heartache. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Schmid. Commissioner Camarado.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all my fellow commissioners. And I think that one of the things that it's really hard when they come back in front of us. It's, the financial aspect of this is huge for any property owner. But I think that one of the big things is that I know a lot of the contractors will have that material list already done. And the materials board is going to be really important. I think if clients can actually say, this is the material I'm going to put on, and we can see that materials board and they're committed to that materials board, then if they're making any changes to that material board, they've got to come back to us or to staff quickly. So I think that's really important. So I am a big proponent of the material boards. We're doing it on big projects, but every home in Burlingame is a big project. Financially for the client as well, the contractor and the city. So that's what I think.
Thank you, Commissioner Camarado. Commissioner Loftus.
Yeah, my wife came back from some public meeting a few years ago where after some trees were cut that no one had a permission to cut. And she came back and reported to me that she sat behind a guy who was a contractor in the city. She didn't know him. He turned to the guy beside him and said, "Oh yeah, we often just do what we need to do and ask for forgiveness later." And what these folks are doing, contractors, I don't think applicants, owners know any better, but contractors sure as hell should know better. And what they're doing is placing a bet that we're not going to say no, because we almost never say no. 95% of the time we find a way to say yes. And until we find a way to say no, until we can generate the gumption to say no, rip it out, this is going to continue to happen. We'd almost be better off having a public coin flip so that, you heads, you can make the change, and tails you can't. And, because they're making a bet that we will never say no. It's not even a 50% chance that we'll say no. So this has got to be painful for them, either by asking for money, like everyone is suggesting. I love 1 in 3 and 5, but at some point we're going to have to say no to somebody, in my view.
Is there anyone else? Okay, so Director Gardner, do you want kind of decisions made at this point? I mean, it sounds like from what I've heard, actually we are in afternoon time, that there is definite kind of consensus on a few issues in regards to numbers 1, 3, and 5 that Commissioner Loftus just brought up. So do we want to get a little more direction on how these numbers and what's related to them? Or do you want to have another subsequent meeting once you've kind of taken all the comments from today, and then we look at this one more time before a final decision is made, which I think might be a better approach, but
I would agree, and okay. I'm also looking to planning manager Huron, but I think this is something these are ideas that have been kind of floating around. We can now get back with staff and sort of say, okay, let's put together a package and a proposal. The bond, I know we would need to look into. I think it's a great idea. I just want to, there's some logistics there we'd want to check. So I think we can take this under advisement and confer with staff because they will be doing a lot of this, and then come back with what we think is the right approach based on the direction we've heard today. But we really appreciate there's a lot of thoughtful comments and very informed by experience, and this is really helpful.
Do my colleagues agree with that process? Thumbs up? Okay, very good. All right, on that note, I just have to make sure everything is covered before I adjourn. We don't have another public comment section, do we? City
No.
attorney? Just, okay. So then on that note, I'd like to thank everyone for being here this morning. I think we had some really good conversations on these 3 topics. So enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.